In a dark past, a voice regrets having been such a foolish mother, wishing she had never left her child alone that day. A chubby little child, leaning on a railing, rejoices at seeing his mother. The same voice continues her lament, saying she should have suspected her husband after he brought that maid into the house. A helpless little boy plays at the top of a vast staircase. At the bottom of the steps, his mother watches him in shock. And that was how that woman lost her most precious love. Desperate, she holds her son in her arms and screams for the servants to call a doctor. She begs in despair for her son to wake up. Meanwhile, the husband, half naked, looks at the scene while his mistress waits for him at the bedroom door. At the funeral, the mother, in her thoughts, realizes she should never have left her son in her husband's care, for all he does is make excuses, and tells her he was careless for just an instant, which she knows is a lie. She is deeply shaken, and he only shows indifference. The blonde woman's name is Esther, and her husband, calling her closer, tells her maliciously that they are still young. She listens, horrified, as he says they can still have as many children as they want, completely indifferent to the young mother's loss. At that moment, upon hearing her husband's cruel words, she realized something within herself. Thinking for a while, she judged that things began to go wrong from that very day. 6 years earlier, Esther woke up abruptly, wearing a beautiful adorned green dress without recognizing the place she was in. The last memory she had was of a party the night before with her sister, before waking up in an unfamiliar room. Her hair was disheveled and her dress wrinkled. She looked worriedly at the man beside her. He snored loudly and tossed in his sleep. She looked at him, astonished, wondering what he was doing there. Despite the strange scene, Esther knew nothing had happened between them. Suddenly, a young blonde woman burst into the room screaming, saying it was a disgrace her sister was in bed with Gellert. Esther, alarmed by her sister's reaction, shouted back at her that it was nothing like what she was thinking, and that it was all a misunderstanding. Her sister, in tears, told her she could not believe she had betrayed her fiancé. The young woman in the green dress heard those words and was shocked by the accusation behind her sister. There was a commotion of people, among them, Esther's fiancé. Still in astonishment, Esther tried to explain the situation to the man, mentally hoping he would understand. After all, he was her betrothed. However, with a malicious look, he told her that he was disappointed and that he had never imagined she was such a wanton woman. Her sister in the pink dress discreetly clutched the arm of Esther's fiancé. Amid the distraction, Esther, unable to grasp everything that was happening, called her fiancé by name. Clifford? The people present there began to hurl all kinds of derogatory remarks at Esther, calling her unattractive, antisocial, and on top of that saying she pretended to be a saint but was actually a fox. Enraged, he said he would never allow such an immoral woman to become the Marchioness of Whittaker. Upon seeing her, now, ex-fiancé and her sister together, she finally realized what had happened. Then, suddenly showing passion, the man said that he had finally realized that there was more than one option to marry, and he looked passionately at Esther's sister, elegant in her ornate pink dress. At that instant, our protagonist realized she had been caught in a trap devised by cruel people. Clifford began to make an announcement before everyone, and then he declared that his engagement to Lady Esther was officially over. Our protagonist recalled that soon after, her marriage to Gellert had been arranged, as a way for her to take responsibility for her actions. It was a ceremony celebrated only by those who had set up that trap. Our protagonist, though beautiful in a wedding dress, wore a sad and desolate expression, as if at that moment she had to resign herself. Sometime later, Gellert, furious, argued with Esther about the young woman's request that he take care of the house while she was busy with her work. She begged him to please consider her words, for she was striving for their family. Night falls, and we see a large mansion with many doors and windows. Esther returns home after an exhausting day and comes across several papers scattered across the floor of the mansion. Her husband, Gellert, awaited her, with the house in complete chaos. He holds her by the waist, wearing a smug expression, and declares, "Household chores are for women, and no man should ever be subjected to cleaning a house. Besides, our child will be born in a few months, and it is inappropriate for the father of the child to do domestic work, don't you think?" After giving birth, life became even busier. She was called a workaholic who showed no maternal traits, but our protagonist ignored such people. She sees her husband's large expenses, sitting in her office, and thinks to herself that she would simply have to make up for what he spends. For that, she must silently ignore the rumors and insults. Her only comfort in that world is her son, Luca. She caresses her son, certain that the servants will treat him well while she is away. And she tells herself that she will do her best to raise him with comfort and happiness. At her work, she instructs the other young women to be meticulous when checking the flowers, for they are the most important ingredient of that cosmetic, and it must meet her expected quality. With a happy smile, she thanks them all and wishes them excellent work. The new product will soon be on sale, and the efforts of her team will be rewarded twice over after so much labor. Walking home, she feels relieved that Gellert is finally taking on his role in raising Luca, for he himself had taken the initiative to hire a maid, and now she would not need to worry about the baby as much as before. While the innocent baby walks near the staircase, a female voice warns Gellert that his wife is about to arrive home. But Gellert replies that he does not care about her, and that they can have some more fun. The baby, upon seeing his mother, rejoices and stands up. At that moment, Esther's life would be changed forever, for her son would fall down the stairs and never wake up again. Sometime after the tragedy, the young woman tells Gellert that she will go to the church to pray for her son, and her immature and insensitive husband questions her as to why. But she promptly answers that she only wants her child's soul to rest in peace. She leaves home determined, yet with a sad and at the same time enraged look, thinking that if she stayed by his side, her anger would likely take over, and she would ultimately end her husband's life. The moonlight illuminates the young woman's chambers as she constantly thinks of her son. Holding her own hands in a gesture of prayer as she cries, she bitterly regrets not having been with him that day, blaming herself greatly. She sinks deeper into her pain, swearing she would do anything to have him back. And on the 100th day, her prayers were answered. An unfamiliar calling told her to climb to the top of Mount Dairen and meet the Golden Dragon. However, she was to make the journey alone. Our protagonist walks through the snow amid a frozen forest. The young blonde no longer bears the same sad look she had when she left home, and her expression is intense despite facing the mountain's cold. She thinks to herself, "Esther, you must reach the Golden Dragon with your own strength." The glacial wind of the mountain lashes our protagonist, and she falls face first into the snow. In tears, she forces herself to keep going. She closes her eyes, thinking of her son. Suddenly, a comforting voice gives her the words, "A great golden dragon appears before our protagonist, welcoming her." Esther, with her large green eyes, gazes in astonishment at the dragon. In an impulse, she begs the great golden dragon to bring her son back. With an ethereal and calm voice, the mythical being says that the child rests in peace, but the anguished mother refuses to give up. However, the golden creature reveals to Esther that if she still wishes to see him, there is another path, which is to return in time to when she and the dragon's descendant first met. Our protagonist receives a beautiful golden lotus flower called the dragon lotus, and the mythical being says that her duty is to make the flower bloom. The dragon instructs her that, once the flower blooms, it will transform into a light that will bring the child's soul back to her. Then our protagonist suddenly wakes up. She is once again in an adorned green dress and a pearl necklace in an unfamiliar room. She feels an immense headache. The young woman looks to the side and sees Gellert sleeping heavily. Esther grits her teeth, furious. She observes with immense disgust the man sleeping at her side, cursing him in her mind. However, looking more closely, she notices that he seemed much younger. Sitting on a luxurious bed, Esther looks around the chambers where she is, finding all of it impossible. She looks at the dress, wondering to herself if it could be possible that she had gone back to the past. Hearing the sound of a door, she panics, for she cannot allow anyone to see her in that state, with Gellert snoring at her side. The one who opens the door is a man in refined garments, wearing a silver brooch with a huge crystal in the center. Esther identifies him as Duke Lehanel. The man enters the room, looking around, judging that he was in the wrong place. Agitated, she begs the Duke to wait. She runs off in delicate green shoes. As soon as she reaches him, our protagonist grabs the man's arm, pleading with him not to leave. Fearfully, she tells him that if he walks out of that room, her life will fall into disarray. With determination, she begs him to listen to her. The Lehanel family carries the lineage of the dragon. According to legend, the first duke of the family took a dragon as his half, and the story spread throughout the empire, traveling across many years until the present. It is said that the dragon suppressed chaos in the whole world since the beginning of life. Moreover, they say that the goddess Justitia granted the dragon to humans and that it was worshipped as a sacred creature. As time passed, the dragon's power was nearly extinguished. However, to this day, the people of the empire call the children of this family descendants of the dragon. Esther recalls the words the golden dragon had spoken to her, And because of this, our protagonist assumes that the magical being must have been referring to Duke Lehinal. The Duke, uncomfortable with the situation, claims he knows nothing about the immoralities of social circles, but that he had no interest whatsoever in pleasures involving other people, if she knew what he meant. However, the young woman, outraged, asks what he was talking about. Bringing her delicate hand closer to his, she explains that her sister and stepmother are trying to trap her in a scheme. The man listens attentively, wondering what trap Esther Fraser could be talking about. She firmly begs him to help her, and the man asks her what she would do if he refused. She begins to hesitate for the first time, fearful that her words might sound rude to a duke, but she cannot back down at that moment. According to news she had read in a newspaper, Duke Lehinal had been conducting experiments to create a creature. However, before being arrested, he fled north. Despite her fear, Esther knows she must try. So, she asks Duke Lehinal if he still intends to create a forbidden creature. The man swallows hard at the young woman's words. He stares back at her with a piercing gaze, asking the young woman how she could have known such information. The young woman, still firm, even though terrified, answers him that she cannot reveal the source of the information, even though it had been published in a newspaper. The Duke listens attentively to the young woman tell him that she has nothing left to lose, and that he, as intelligent as he is, will be able to understand what she is saying to him. Letting out a deep sigh, he tells her that he can tell when he is being blackmailed. He reaches the door and begins to open it, and asks Esther not to misunderstand him, and declares to her that if she had explained, he would have helped her anyway, and there was no need to blackmail him with his experiment. He notices the door was half open and fastens the latch, telling her that he swore she was one of those young women attached to pleasures. She immediately tells him she was not that kind, and that when she woke up, she was already in that room, beside that man. Our protagonist realizes the danger she had been in the entire time while the door was unlocked, and the Duke quickly pulls away, going in another direction. The Duke looks at Gellert sleeping, lamenting that her arms are far too weak to remedy the situation. Easily, he lifts the man from the bed, pulling him by his white shirt, and while dragging him outside, the Duke notices that far beyond being asleep, Gellert seems unconscious. At that moment, Esther then realizes that he must have been drugged with some substance, and notes how easily the Duke lifts Gellert from there. The Duke opens the window of the room, and our protagonist panics, asking him if he was going to throw him from that height. Relaxed, the man tells her not to worry. The height was not enough to end his life, and that he had already done this several times before. Esther hears that information and becomes afraid of Duke Lehinal. Suddenly, the two hear voices in the corridors of the mansion, and then we see Lady Rachel Fraser, Esther's sister, in a beautiful pink dress, walking through the corridors of the mansion as if searching for something. One of her ladies-in-waiting asks where she is going, and Rachel answers that she is looking for her sister, since she has lost sight of her for some time. The young woman accompanying her tells her that she is very considerate. Esther, worried and still inside the chambers, hears the girls' conversation in the corridor, realizing that her sister is already nearby. Suddenly, the Duke gently grabs her hand, saying there is no more time. He pulls her closer, embracing her by the waist, and asks her to do as he says. With a soft smile, he tells the young woman that, even if she is not used to acting, all she has to do is follow her cue. He touches the young woman's face gently and asks her to close her eyes. Outside, her sister is already at the door, aided by a butler who said Esther had entered there. Lady Rachel notices that the door is locked, but he says he has the key and unlocks it for her. The lady begins calling for her sister, turning the golden doorknob. She is met with the following scene. Duke Lehinal kissing Lady Esther, her sister. The young woman in the pink dress is completely astonished to see the two together, and the retinue behind her is equally shocked, already causing quite a commotion. The two continue to kiss, oblivious to what is happening at the entrance to the room. Her sister, with tears in her eyes, calls her name and asks, "What about the Marquis Whitaker?" The ladies-in-waiting begin to gossip behind her sister's back, saying what a huge scandal the situation is. That fellow who was with her was probably a nobody without shame. Rachel storms into the room, asking who that fellow was. What was he doing with her sister? They break the kiss. Esther is still a little emotional from the gesture, her cheeks flushed and her gaze fascinated on the man. Irritated by the interruption, Duke Lehinal asks what all the noise was about. The young women are shocked to discover that the mysterious fellow was the Duke. Satisfied with the commotion caused, Esther looks at the Duke and says they did a great job, to which he replies that they cannot disappoint the audience. Can they? Stepping toward the audience that witnessed the kiss, he declares that the nobody would like to finally introduce himself. He calls first on Lady Rachel Fraser, and in a determined manner, he tells the lady that she must never have known the word privacy in her life. And the strangest thing about all of this is that he remembers locking the door. The blonde lady does not give up and makes a tearful expression. After a brief pause, the young woman apologizes to the man and claims that she was only worried about her sister, Lady Esther. Rachel whimpers and sniffs softly. Causing people to believe in her performance, they saying how kind her heart is and that she is a poor little thing. Maintaining his composure, the Duke of Lehenal confronts the young woman, claiming to be confused by that behavior. After all, why would she be crying? Or would she, daughter of an earl, have something to share with him? A duke. A little nervous about the scene, Esther recognizes that all of this will be a big problem when she returns home, for Rachel will tell everything to their parents. Although legitimately enjoying the whole situation, she delicately tugs at the duke's sleeve. She tells him that everything is fine now, and he returns her smile. The man gently holds the young woman's face, declaring how truly kind she was. She feels relieved to see the friendly expression on his face, wondering to herself if that really was Duke Lehenal. Suddenly changing his expression, he turns to the crowd at the door of the room and asks everyone how long they intend to remain there. Everyone becomes extremely embarrassed and apologizes to Your Highness, except Rachel, who becomes furious at the Duke's words and ignores her lady-in-waiting, calling her to leave. The door closes with a heavy sound, and in the sumptuous room, only Esther and the Duke remain standing there in silence. She lets out a sigh of relief and thanks the man for having helped her. He chuckles lightly and asks her what the thanks are for if moments earlier she had been blackmailing him. Esther becomes angry at his reply. However, despite her reaction, she composes herself, making a curtsy to the Duke, offering her most sincere apologies and explaining to him that even within her family there is very little trust. Esther tells the Duke that even the Countess and the Marquis do not have much consideration for her. Our protagonist also reveals to him that her last salvation would be to marry the Marquis Whitaker, as promised by her grandparents. He remains silent while she tells him that she was afraid of falling into the trap prepared by them, thus losing her last thread of hope. Because of that, she panicked, and once again apologized to him for her earlier words. The Duke tells her that it was no problem and that it was time for them to go to the ground floor of the mansion. However, Esther does not seem to quite understand. He patiently explains to her that if they stay in the room any longer, new rumors will spread, and she acknowledges that it is true. The man observes her silently as she adjusts her hair, and in his thoughts, he wonders if she was often subjected to traps like that. He extends his hand to the young woman, and she asks him if he will escort her downstairs. He asks her if she would prefer to go alone. Holding his hand, she tells him that she used to hear that he was very cold with ladies, but now she realized they were all false, for he was very kind to her. With a gentle smile, she tells him that no one had ever treated her with such kindness. He is surprised to hear the young woman's words. Leading her through the elegant corridor, he suggests that they continue with that farce, since they had come this far. Esther asks him what that was about, confused. As they walk along, the Duke suggests that they dance at least one song or two, but the young woman does not understand the reason for it. He finally explains to her that if they do not persist with it, Esther's sister will probably continue to doubt her. Astonished by his cunning, our protagonist asks him how he can know the nature of her sister having met her only that day. The man simply answers her that foolish people think in similar ways. That kind of people cannot stand seeing others happy, so they become devoted to making others' lives miserable. Esther clears her throat, apparently agreeing with the Duke's words. Somehow, our protagonist seems to have felt heard. He continues with his speech, telling Esther that there is still a chance Lady Rachel will doubt their relationship, so he allows her to call him by his first name, James. However, the young woman tells him that it could cause an even greater scandal if she did not call him Your Highness. But he counters her argument, telling her that the scandal had already been planted since they were caught kissing behind closed doors. The young woman, trying to dissuade him from the idea, says that she is trying to tell him that in that way, people would really think that they were lovers. Still walking through the corridors, James asks her if she would be upset if there were rumors that they were lovers. Esther tries to redeem herself, saying no. He, with a handsome smile and beautiful blue eyes, tells her that then there was no problem at all. He asks her to try calling him James. Esther, hesitant, thinks that she was satisfied with the kiss, but that she feels very embarrassed to call him by his first name. Apparently, our protagonist had never experienced anything like that, And then, timidly, she calls him James. He smiles, quite pleased with it. In a beautiful golden hall, many people are enjoying themselves at a very formal ball. Women gossip about having caught the Duke of Leonal kissing that ridiculous Esther. After all, for that society, he was a man of the highest class, unattainable and elegant. The ladies sigh just at the thought of him. They exchange malicious words, claiming that they would be better choices for the Duke, and that with all the situation that had happened, besides being presumptuous, he had terrible taste in women. The young women continue conspiring, coming to the conclusion that perhaps that is the type of woman the Duke likes. The conversation continues, and they talk about how one of their brothers told them that some men approach horrible women only to use them and discard them. A man passing by overhears fragments of the women's conversation and thinks that then everything made sense. Other men at the ball approach him, asking what he could be talking about, and the young man promptly answers that he found it all strange, for Duke Lehenal was as stubborn as his predecessor, and it was odd that he had never experienced a scandal before. The man, as malicious as the young women, comments frankly that he judged it would not take even a month for the Duke to tire of Lady Esther Fraser. Beside him, a red-haired young man listens to the conversation and seems slightly annoyed. He takes a sip of his wine, thinking of Esther Fraser and James Lehenal. This man is Marquis Clifford Whittaker. Clifford gives a malicious smile, questioning whether James had his heart stolen by his fiancée. He remembers that young Lehenal had great achievements from a very early age, when he created a magic circle at only 5 years old. The young man had also refuted the theory of a professor at the Royal Academy when he was only 8. And when at only 15 years old, the young man was already fighting with swords like a specialist. Meanwhile, some mothers complained that their sons did not have the same mastery. James Lehenal did not seem to be very appreciated by his classmates. However, Clifford presumptuously thinks about the fact that Esther had always been in love with him and that she was desperate to have his affection. The nobleman is very cunning and in his thoughts devises ways to make Esther dismiss James. For if he seduced her correctly, no matter how serious the Duke was about her, he was sure that she would choose him. He sets his wineglass down on a marble table. The Marquis then plans to send an interesting gift to Lady Esther soon. Duke James Lehenal and Lady Esther Fraser become the center of attention at the ball as they walk among the guests. The people are astonished to have seen the two of them cross the doors together. The young woman walks beside James and laughs sweetly while giving him little taps on the shoulder. And leaving everyone surprised, the guests notice his arm wrapped by her. Our protagonist cannot help but notice the commotion surrounding them, realizing how efficient the Duke's plan is. Delicately, he takes Esther's hand, kisses it, and asks if she would do him the honor of granting him that dance. She prepares to happily answer the Duke's request, this time almost calling him by his title. But she quickly corrects herself, calling him James while blushing slightly. In the background, there is chatter from people who find that an outrage. Before dancing, they walk through the immense golden hall and discreetly James praises Esther's performance, especially when she called him by his name. And the young woman thanks him for the compliment, telling him that she had practiced while they descended the stairs. He takes her in his arms to finally begin the dance. Esther worries about not being very good at dancing faster songs. The man reassures her, saying that she could dance however she could, and if she had difficulties, she could follow his steps. The two begin to dance a beautiful waltz played by the orchestra, and immediately Esther feels relieved that it is not a fast melody. With a determined expression and blushing cheeks, the young woman tells him that she will be fine, and that she would not let him lead the whole time. He smiles, asking if her whole face is red because she is nervous. Our protagonist is caught off guard by James's attractive boldness. He pulls her by the waist, bringing their bodies closer, and asks Esther to follow his steps. It is the first time our protagonist is so close to him, and James asks her if she is feeling calmer, and the young woman, elated, answers him that yes. She blushes slightly at being so close to him, and thanks him, confessing that she has always blushed very easily. Briefly, she remembers how her emotions got in her way in her previous job. When she was much younger, if she revealed how nervous she was in a business meeting, all the men would look down on her. So every time she had that kind of appointment, she applied heavy layers of makeup to hide her blush. However, the makeup was always of poor quality, which made our protagonist's life difficult. While they waltz, James notices the expressions constantly changing on Esther's face, which to him was very interesting. At the same time, far in her memories, the young woman thinks of all the times she tried to improve the quality of cosmetics. until she reached the perfect formula of the pearl powder, which became very popular and was her greatest source of income, which was very positive for her. James tells her that he understands Esther's feelings well and reveals to her that when he was younger, he tried to hide his tears, but it was always in vain, which made him very upset. He tells the young woman that when he was very young, he tried to manipulate a spell to control the tears, but failed miserably, and it had not worked. They perform an elegant twirl in the Golden Hall, and he continues his narrative. Because of the spell that went wrong, the muscles of his face were temporarily paralyzed, which left him frowning for an entire week, and the servants of his palace had to hold back their laughter when he passed by. Unable to contain herself with the story, Esther starts laughing, and he is happy. Laughing as well and asking if the compromising story from his childhood had relaxed her. Still laughing gracefully, she says, yes. However, by accident, our protagonist slips on the smooth floor and ends up stepping on James's foot. She becomes very embarrassed and begs him 1,000 pardons. He observes her in silence without breaking the waltz pose. Our protagonist grows apprehensive, afraid that she may have hurt James's foot with her high heel. While they dance, James observes the other people waltzing in the Golden Hall. He gives a dazzling smile to keep up appearances. He asks the young woman if she thought he had trained his feet to strengthen them. Then he tells her that no, and that the step on his foot had hurt quite a lot. Esther apologizes once again. Next, he confesses to her that it was only a joke, and she becomes indignant. Amused by the situation, he asks her if she is angry, and she tells him no. In front of the other guests at the ball, he asks her not to be upset, and the young woman, annoyed, tells him she was not angry. The Baron and Baroness of Velde, observing the Duke and Esther Fraser at the ball, commented on how serious the involvement between the two appeared to be. Our protagonist notices that the Duke displays a satisfied smile. The man feels excited to realize that the Velde couple was believing in their disguise. While Esther and James dance, the man is mentally plotting a strategy, for he knows that if he throws too much bait to the guests, it would start a great scandal, but what he needs are small rumors. He looks at his waltzing partner, and in his thoughts, rationalizes that he would not like Esther to suffer attacks because of such rumors, and he must make sure she has some defense before anything else. The young woman notices the Velde Baron couple. Continuing the dance, Esther declares to James that he is very clever, which takes him by surprise. He gives a bigger smile, wondering if she had picked up on his intentions in displaying them to the noble couple. He thinks to himself that she may be much smarter than she appears, and that in the future she may be a valuable informant. He recalls how much sharper his perception became after he gained his duke's title, and that there are members of high society just waiting for him to slip so they can devour him. Our protagonist is astonished by James's intelligence, realizing that he did not receive the title of Duke at only 17 years old for nothing. The people of that empire always said how much Duke Lehenal had been a genius since childhood. Everything he does is blessed by the gods, and luck seems to always be on his side. Despite this, there must have been difficulties that only he knows. However, despite her curiosity, Esther resigns herself not to ask too many questions about his past, for she herself knows very well what it is to avoid those memories. She tells him that they have already danced enough to spark many rumors and that it would be better if they return now. Gently, James suggests to her that she go with him, to avoid being bombarded with questions, to which she thanks the gesture. Mentally, Esther knows that this will not save her from the interrogation she will receive when she gets home, and she will use the time of the return to invent excuses. Suddenly, a crowd of women gathers around our protagonist, inviting her to all possible social events. Musical gatherings, tea parties, among others, which leaves Esther shocked. The young woman tries to find James, but he had already been pulled into a circle of conversation with other men. Some curious young women call Esther to talk, and the young woman, already showing her cunning, imagines that it is because the Duke is a difficult man to approach, and because of that, they are paying attention to her. Esther barely sits down in one of the luxurious chairs, and one of the young women asks her if she will attend the tea party next week, and our protagonist, who was already ready to decline all invitations, changes her mind. She begins to give a smile with an air of mystery, and she thanks the lady for the invitation, but delicately explains that her mother does not yet allow her to attend social events. The young women are dissatisfied with the answer and argue that Lady Esther is already an adult and that her mother does not need to be so overprotective, since they themselves heard that her sister can attend as many events as she wants. Upon hearing such words, Lady Rachel Fraser becomes enraged. Trying to fix the situation, her younger sister approaches, claiming that the ladies would get a wrong impression of the situation. In a demonstration of cruelty disguised as kindness, Lady Rachel tells her sister that their mother did not let her go out much, for she did not receive many invitations and that many would invite her to events with bad intentions, and that their mother was only worried. Then, one of the young women expresses that Rachel seems to be saying that not only to insinuate that Esther is not considerate of the Countess's kindness, but also to insult the young women present there. Exalted with the gossip, one of the ladies declares that the Countess was worried about the daughter, even without having given birth to her. How dare you speak ill of the noble woman? The tone of the conversation takes an unexpected turn, turning into a quarrel, and one of the women says that Lady Esther needs to revisit her etiquette and good manners. Lady Rachel Fraser tries in vain to calm the ladies' tempers. Our protagonist thinks about how ugly the whole scene caused by the women's pride is. She replies that she did not know her mother felt that way, and the woman continues to attack her, saying that she is no longer a child and that not knowing should not be an excuse. Feeling guilty, Esther admits that she had recently received an invitation from Marchioness Gasley, but her mother had not allowed her to go. She reveals to the woman who was attacking her that her mother had told her very bad things about the Marchioness's salon, and because of that, Esther had declined the invitation. While the ladies were talking, other guests gossiped about her at the ball, wondering how someone like Lady Esther Fraser could have received an invitation to such a high-class event. One of the ladies at the table asks our protagonist if her mother had judged the invitation inappropriate for her. Suddenly, another young woman asks Esther when exactly she had received that invitation, to which she replies 3 or 4 days ago. In an accusatory tone, a young woman with golden eyes reveals she had seen Lady Rachel at the Marchioness's salon during that exact period of time. In a provocation, the same lady then asks if her sister had not stolen her invitation. Lady Rachel is caught red-handed and terribly uncomfortable with the claims made by the young women in the circle of conversation. They then ask her directly, "What happened, Lady Rachel?" The young women insist on the matter, demanding that the lady justify herself. She looks at them with a very distressed expression. Then, in an attempt to justify herself, she tells them that she went in her sister's place. But Esther, knowing her younger sister's nature, gives a discreet laugh. She thinks to herself that Lady Rachel had dug her own grave, because according to our protagonist, people really can change. But her sister was not one of those people. Calmly, Esther tells Rachel that at that time, the young woman had told her she was busy attending several salons at once, and that she, Esther, had received only one invitation, which was from Marchioness Gasley, her only invitation. She continues her speech, claiming that after Rachel's name became well known in social circles, several invitations arrived at their house, but that she would never have taken one of her sister's invitations and had not even tried to accompany her. Explaining her actions, she says that such behavior would not be appropriate for a noble lady. Other people in the Great Golden Hall were already overhearing parts of the heated conversation, commenting on the intensity of the eldest Fraser daughter. Rachel displays an enraged expression when Esther tells her that not only had she taken her only invitation to a social event, but she was hiding the truth from other people. The younger sister, in a last attempt to justify herself, says that she had understood everything wrong, and that she would never do such a thing. Esther does not listen to Rachel's shabby excuses and, with much resentment, asks her, why does she not simply apologize to her sister? Lady Rachel remains completely silent, devoid of arguments. Observing the distraught expression of her younger sister, Esther realizes that no matter what happened, the young woman would never apologize, since she did not even say please to her. Adjusting her hair, Esther thinks that she had already pressured her too much. Suddenly, the Duke of Lehenal appears, calling Esther to leave while placing a coat over the young woman's shoulders. Concerned, he asks her if she has a headache. Timidly, she admits that she feels a little pain and that it is nothing serious while putting on the coat he had brought for her. He removes her from the toxic circle of conversation and tells her that he had medicines in his carriage, offering her some for when he took her home. As she is escorted by the Duke, the young women observe that their relationship seemed more than a casual affair, seeing how much he cared for her. In a serious moment, James tells her that, after everything that had happened, the young woman's headaches all seemed to be at the Fraser house. He is sure that having some medicine at home could help her. The people in the Great Golden Hall watch as the two of them leave the ball. The two walk through a great imperial garden toward an ornate carriage. Already inside the vehicle, Esther lets out a long sigh of relief. Noticing the young woman's features, James tells her that she does not look well, and that here between them she could relax and take a weight off her shoulders. Esther gently thanks him. The man places his hand on the young woman's forehead, checking her temperature. Still concerned, he says that with luck, she does not have a fever. She admits to herself that the man's sudden touch had startled her a little, and he leans down to look for something inside the carriage. The Duke of Lehenal shows her a case full of medicines of the most varied colors and types. He explains to her that, because of his noble title, he constantly lives surrounded by danger, so he must always be prepared for any situation. He gives her a vial with some aspirins, telling her that they would help with her headache, and she thanks him once again. She takes one of the pills, complaining about its bitter taste, while the man seems to be looking for something else among the medicines. Suddenly, he tosses her a sweet candy, which she eats immediately. He also eats a candy, and the young woman praises the delicious flavor. He tells her that his butler would be immensely happy to hear her compliment. While the young woman eats her candy, James reminds her that he is a magic knight. He explains to her that knights are able to access their own aura, and magicians can manifest magic circles to use energy. Continuing his narrative, he tells her that to become a magic knight, he must create an alternative bridge between his energy and a magic circle. He reveals that the training was extremely arduous, so difficult that he constantly cried from pain and exhaustion. However, with his role as the next duke, he could never expose his weaknesses. His butler, Albert, constantly gave him sweets to cheer his spirits. Esther listens attentively as James tells her that he no longer eats sweets as much as before, and despite being an adult man, the butler still treats him like a child, making sure he always carries a candy or two. Our protagonist is amused by the story, smiles, and says that James is very lucky to have someone so caring at his side. James replies that Albert was his family. The Duke pauses for a moment and realizes that he had revealed to the young woman a very personal aspect of his life. But that intimacy happens precisely because the two of them are in the same boat. They look at each other silently in the carriage. Esther, letting out a light laugh, asks him if this is a boat she also cannot abandon voluntarily, right? The man replies to her that she would have to be ready to put her life at risk if she wanted to leave. She is a woman of many talents who certainly did not deserve to go through misfortunes. Esther reveals to him that when she stopped him in the room, she was willing to risk everything to work with him, and that there was no need to intimidate her, to which he replies that the young woman shows an interesting attitude. Then he hands her some vials, telling her that there was an antidote wrapped in the paper and that she should always carry it with her. He explains to her that if she is going to stay by his side, the young woman's life will constantly be in danger, and the best thing they can do is be prepared. Esther curiously asks him how much poison that antidote would be able to cure. James is delighted to realize how Esther really was not foolish at all, and that she was beginning to show signs of being very aware of the world around her. He goes on explaining that assassins use a minimal amount of poison in tea. If they exceed that proportion, the drink would change its color and taste, making the alteration evident. For this reason, they add only a few drops. He tells her that the antidote in her hands will cure any poison, assuming it would be something compared to a cup of tea. Esther is shocked to realize how strong those pills were. After realizing this, she also notes that they must cost a fortune, possibly the same value as a 3-story house in the commercial district. With a more serious expression, James tells her that she must know how bad his reputation is, but that he is truly generous with people who stand by his side. She listens to him in silence while he tells her that, as long as they are in the same boat, the young woman's life will not be easy, but that he will do everything to support her, even allowing her to use his name if anyone tries to harm her family. Our protagonist remains silent as she hears him say that, once her problems are resolved, if she wishes to marry another man, he will let her go. The Duke knows well that Esther's father's finances are not going very well at the moment, and that to make up for this, he will offer a generous dowry for her hand in marriage. In addition, he has saved money so that she may have her own shop, and when they marry, she may take over the business. Esther analyzes the situation, realizing that he is trying to bribe her with money and a stable future, so that she remains loyal to him, despite having only known him for a few hours. Our protagonist becomes radiant with joy at the Duke's proposals. She calls him Your Highness, which confuses him since he had explicitly asked her to call him by his name. Then, displaying an expression of pure enchantment, she replies to him that he is practically her boss now and that she cannot simply call him by his name. He listens to everything, very surprised. The man gives her a smile and says that he greatly enjoys seeing a lady like her with such attitude. Very clever, taking advantage of the conversation about future business, Esther asks him if he could tell her about the experiments he had been conducting. He, still smiling, says that he will share with her whatever she wants to know. In a palace far from there, a female voice asks another person to prepare a lavender honey tea for Lady Rachel to drink as soon as she arrives home. Sitting in a sumptuous armchair, we see a noble lady who is Countess Patricia Fraser, mother of Lady Rachel and Lady Esther. She awaits the return of her youngest daughter, eager to know how her day had been. With a malicious expression, she says that from that day on, her youngest daughter will finally receive her rightful place as the next Marchioness Whittaker. She will not allow that dull Esther to become Marchioness. How could she let the young woman, and not her own daughter, receive such a noble title? After all, she knew that Marcus Whittaker did not care for Esther and only had eyes for her beautiful Rachel. Her precious daughter, Rachel. She could hardly wait to see her and hear her tell of her adventures that day. A servant announces the arrival of Lady Rachel. With a desperate expression, Rachel abruptly enters the chambers, calling for her mother. She throws herself into her lap with tears in her eyes and asks her mother what she could do. Rachel then reveals to her mother that Esther had ruined her plans. Quite far from there, in a beautiful carriage, James asks Esther about the golden dragon she had seen in her dreams. He listens as the young woman tells him what the magical creature had said to her, and that the dragon wishes for the Duke's experiments to succeed one day. Our protagonist knows that he is talented and a strong ally. However, she cannot tell him that she has gone back in time, for it is too dangerous. She watches him with a serious expression and crossed arms, wondering if he really believes her, despite the crazy stories. James, with a somewhat stern expression, says that he feels happy that the golden dragon shares the same feelings as he does. Esther replies that she had no expectations that he would believe her immediately, and she had not told him her dream before because she did not want him to trust her without any proof. The young woman tells him that the golden dragon had shared the future with her, and he shows curiosity to know what it is about. She falls silent and swallows hard. Our protagonist reveals to James that very night, a thief will enter Marchioness Gasley's mansion, intending to steal her works of art. Esther tells him that if this information proves true, she asks him to send a carriage to the Fraser mansion tomorrow, and then the two of them can discuss the details of their alliance. James observes the young woman and reflects silently on everything she had told him. Our protagonist also stares back at him, evaluating the situation. Then suddenly she asks him if he would be capable of stopping the thief? Such a question leaves James very surprised. He then reminds her that not long ago the Marchioness had invited her to her mansion, correct? He asks her if she is trying to create some connection with the Marchioness, since the Fraser and Gasley families did not have many ties, to which Esther promptly replies that such ties do not exist, but that during a party, the Marchioness spoke with her. The young woman tells him that the noble lady was a good person, and for that reason, Esther had made her a pearl bracelet. However, Esther was very surprised to receive the invitation to visit her at her mansion. The truth about the invitation, however, would only be revealed much later. James decides to help her capture the bandit since the Marchioness had been kind to her, and doing this would be like repaying her kindness. He assumes that he will make up an excuse and wait at her mansion. However, he adds that if no bandit shows up, he will be in trouble. She, fearful of that happening, tells him that if the bandit does not come, he can use her as an excuse that he wanted to send new bracelets to the Marchioness, but did not know what colors she would like. That way, he can say to the noble lady that Esther was too embarrassed to go there personally, and that he volunteered to ask her which colors pleased the Marchioness. James is impressed with the young woman's cleverness and quick thinking. He laughs, relieved with the plan B devised by our protagonist, and honestly wishes he will not need to use such excuses. But if that is the case, he assures that he will act as a gentleman wanting to please his beloved. Esther's face blushes upon hearing James's words. However, she scolds herself and tells herself that she must not fall in love with him and could not be deceived by his handsome face. The Duke stares at her while the young woman makes a very serious expression. He becomes concerned and asks her if her headache is getting worse. Esther is quite bold and declares that he has a beautiful face and that she needs to stay alert or she may run into another kind of danger. He smiles at the compliment and is delighted to hear her words. He also says that she is a very beautiful lady. Our protagonist feels a little awkward hearing such words from the Duke and says that he had no obligation to compliment her back. He is amused by the situation, but reveals to her that he did not compliment her out of obligation, but that he was being sincere, for he was not a man to lie about such things. Upon hearing what he said, she thanks him for his sincerity. With a seductive look, James says that she seems not to believe him yet, and that when they kissed, he was very surprised by the beauty of the young woman's green eyes. He confesses that many magicians would fall in love with that shade of green, and high-class spells shine in that intense green if the enchantments are performed correctly. So it can be said that this color is tied to great success. Esther's cheeks flush upon hearing James's explanation. She is shocked by the beautiful compliment he gave her. Seeing the young woman with a different look, he calls her by name. She sighs, saying that he is still more beautiful than her, leaving him confused. Then, Esther exclaims and says that he is so handsome that if people had the same features, cosmetic companies would go bankrupt. The ladies in the capital would do anything to have the same skin and beautiful eyes he has. She pauses for a moment and tells him how many young women use makeup to beautify themselves, without knowing how much it can poison them, just as Esther once did in the past. Seeing only wealth only makes you become more greedy. Seeing prosperous lands makes you desire more fertile soils. Everyone wants to be more beautiful than others, generating a kind of covetousness. But society will not allow greed to be satisfied by desire alone. Compact powder made with lead, poisonous eye drops to brighten people's gaze. And so they destroyed their bodies, coming closer to ending their lives. They are willing to pay the necessary price to follow the next trend, thus avoiding being left aside by society. They are hurt by their own greed. After getting married, Esther's life turned into a whirlwind, and it was only when she stepped away from high society that she realized that true happiness does not come from a beauty standard that destroys your body. The judgments and compliments of others will all vanish at the end of the day when you remove your makeup. Esther was reflecting in her office, wearing elegant night clothes. Suddenly, something caught her attention, and she looked up. Happiness cannot be found in what we see on the outside. Luca sleeps in his little crib. While watching her son sleep, Esther declares that if you only care about appearances, then one day you will realize how truly unhappy you are. James reflects that if someone seeks happiness only in appearances, they will surely end up unhappy. Wow. The Golden Dragon prefers people with unique characteristics, a rare kind of people who possess a strong heart and never give up. James smiles and tells the young woman that now he understands why the Golden Dragon had chosen her. She is surprised and asks the man why. And he replies that she is an interesting and tough woman. For a moment, she remembers the bad memories with her husband, Gellert, in another life, when he told her that she was stubborn. Our protagonist immediately starts to sulk. Esther, upset for having remembered the past, thinks that, looking at the whole picture, throwing Gellert out the window had been the best choice, and she wishes he had broken at least one or two legs. James enjoys watching the young woman's expressions. She realizes that James is laughing out loud, but she cannot understand why. She asks him if he finds her interesting, to which he promptly replies that if she is not an interesting woman, then no one else in the world would be. The carriage stops in front of the Fraser mansion. James politely helps Esther down from the carriage, and they exchange smiles. Leading her by the hand so that the family's butler could see, he takes the opportunity to ask her if she would like help with any other matter, besides the one involving Marchioness Gasley. Without letting go of his hand, Esther tells him that she has already lived 21 years in darkness and gives him a grateful look. He says goodbye to our protagonist, telling her that he will contact her tomorrow afternoon and wishes her to stay safe. As the carriage quickly drives away from the mansion, Esther reflects that her revenge will be easier thanks to the Duke's help. However, deep inside, she knows that he does not imagine the real reason behind the meaning of that revenge. And besides, she senses that this is a task she must do alone. Then, the butler asks for her attention, telling the young woman that her mother is calling for her. She nods and says she will go soon. With a determined look and almost making a prayer, she says to her son, not yet born in this timeline, that she will do things right. Esther finds her family in a refined living room. Everyone seems very annoyed with her presence, and her sister is in tears. Her stepmother gives her a threatening look while her sister sobs at her side. Esther observes the two women, aware that Rachel was crying false tears, and that by the Countess's look, she must already know about what had happened at the party. Her father orders her to explain everything, while holding a glass of liquor. Our protagonist then says that she has nothing to explain and would not even know what to say. Upon hearing her words, the stepmother lets out a loud laugh. Aggressively, the noblewoman asks Esther if she intended to play the fool. She had abandoned her sister at a party after leaving her in a delicate position, and on top of that, jumped into the arms of a man without worrying about her family. Our protagonist, without losing her composure, asks her stepmother if Rachel had not told her that the Duke had personally insisted on escorting her home. A silence fills the room, and everyone becomes very embarrassed with Esther's response. The young woman continues her speech, saying that Rachel was with her at that moment, so she assumed her sister had told them. Her stepmother is horrified to learn that she had returned with Duke Lahenal. Her father abruptly stands up, questioning if all that was true. Esther, unshaken, replies that she would never invent such an obvious lie, adding that the butler saw them getting out of the carriage, should he wish to confirm the facts. Her father, radiant with his own greed, says there is no need, and, in an attempt to flatter his daughter, says that a mature and kind young woman like her would never lie to him. Immediately after, he asks her to sit and tell him everything about how she met the Duke. She lies, telling a plausible story about the party, saying that after drinking and feeling dizzy, she went to look for one of the rooms to rest, but ended up finding the Duke by chance. She says it was her fault, for she had not knocked on the door. So when trying to leave the room, she apologized to him, but he asked her to stay. Before she could leave, the Duke called out to her. Immediately afterward, Esther tells her father that the Duke was bored and invited the young woman to talk with him. With a love-struck air, Esther comments that after spending some time together, they created a connection, and that she had a lot of fun with him. After feeling better, the Duke invited her to go down to the hall so they could dance. However, during the waltz, she began to feel dizzy again, so she decided to return home. But the Duke insisted that he take her home in his carriage. Her father, a very curious man, quickly asks her what happened afterward and if the Duke had told her he wanted to see her again. Esther tells her father that they will see each other again and that she was asked to wait for his message. The nobleman bursts into loud laughter and says that all of this is incredible. Rachel displays a very upset and envious expression, and her mother, sitting at her side, remains silent. Our protagonist is very astute and can read her treacherous family's expressions well, assuming that they expect the situation to end quickly. But to their misfortune, she does not intend to let everything end so soon. Rachel is surprised to hear Esther's words as she apologizes to her stepmother, saying that she had not returned home with her younger sister. And she did so not to upset the Duke and possibly worsen Rachel's social situation. Esther continued her speech, reporting to her stepmother that Rachel had mobilized several people to look for her. She led a group to the room where Esther and the Duke were resting and, impulsively, accused the man of being on a romantic date with her. Rachel is paralyzed with shame upon hearing her sister's words. Esther, in her shrewdness, defended her little sister, arguing that she was not to blame for not having seen the Duke's face and that her screams had attracted a crowd. Esther's narrative left their father shocked. Our protagonist adds that the Duke was already fed up with Rachel's accusations. In an intense expression of fury, he begins to grind his teeth and tense his face. Suddenly, the man rises abruptly and begins to verbally assault Rachel, who is terrified. The young woman, who must have been accustomed to being the favorite, saw her father's figure drastically change into an angry man. The man continues shouting at Rachel, asking her what she would have done if Esther had not been there to defend her. But the young woman tries to defend herself, justifying that there was no way to know that the young man was the Duke. As the discussion progresses, Esther reaches for a fine porcelain cup. With a satisfied smile, she takes a sip of tea. And in her thoughts, she imagines that to fight a rabid dog, you send another rabid dog against it. Observing the scene, Esther knows that the love her stepmother feels for her daughter is completely different from the love her father feels. After all, her father sees Rachel as a valuable tool to arrange a strategic marriage. The man continues to rage at the young woman. On the other hand, the Countess sees a younger version of herself in Rachel and wants to recreate a prettier and brighter version of herself in her daughter. Apparently, the Countess sees Rachel as a future replacement for herself, and consequently, she sees Esther as a shadow of her mother, Juliana. In the Countess's absurd logic, if Rachel is disadvantaged in any way, she sees it as a victory of Juliana over her. The young woman knows well that her stepmother would not sit idly by and simply let that happen. The Countess is furious, and her expression is dark and wrathful. She does not realize that she has already won Esther's father's heart. In an unexpected gesture, Esther delicately holds her father's arm, saying that everything is fine and that it is important he not get angry for the sake of his health. She reminds him that the doctor had recommended staying away from alcohol, tobacco, and avoiding getting too worked up. Her father is surprised that she knows this information. The young woman promptly tells him that she constantly asks the doctor about his health, and her father, touched by her concern, tells her that she is a wonderful daughter. Esther knows that her father smokes and drinks frequently, and that because of this, his health has worsened. However, what she tells him is that he must remain healthy to see the family prosper and be able to play with his grandchildren in the future. Despite his daughter's sweet words, the Count saw only greed. He already imagined himself as the father-in-law of Duke Lehanel, a status that would make him untouchable, and his laughter was pure arrogance. Our protagonist realizes how effective flattery is with him. Far away, the beautiful Gasly Palace is illuminated by the moonlight. In a gallery with several works of art and fine sculptures, a shadow begins to sneak around. A figure with a large bag passes quickly. The thief is excited thinking about the unique opportunity it was to infiltrate so easily into the Gasly family's art gallery, despite it being heavily guarded. He feels proud seeing the stolen artifacts in his bag, and that thanks to it, he had managed to get inside. We discover that the client who had ordered the theft had given him a magical bag that neutralized security spells. It is a miraculous item for thieves. The hooded man brags about having tested it at the Ron family mansion before, leaving the chambers while passing imperceptibly through the magical barrier. The thief had been able to descend through a window with help of a rope, relieved that no magic had been triggered by him. He thinks that now he just needs to reach the ground floor of the mansion, and suddenly he finds himself captured by some kind of spell that caught him completely off guard. He floats enveloped in a bluish aura without understanding what was happening there. In the mansion's garden, a butler watches in astonishment as Duke Lehanel manipulates his magic sphere to capture the thief. The thief is stunned to see the nobleman and wonders what he could be doing there. The Duke quickly grabs the bag to see what had been stolen, and he tells the butler that the bag was a rather elaborate magical tool, which needed layers of spells in order to be created. The butler is shocked to see the stolen goods, and the Duke asks him what that thief was trying to take that was so valuable. Then, the butler tells him about some very expensive and rare works of art that were kept inside the gallery. The Lord declares to him that, in total, the thief had tried to steal 4 works. The Duke tries to recall one of the authors of the paintings, but he has no memory of that name. The butler explained that, unlike the others, that sculptor was little known in the art world. He also indicated that Elysis might not even have been his real name, since, according to the dealer from whom the work was acquired, the name was almost illegible, leaving only a few letters forming the word. He picks up the statue, and smiling slightly, he tells the Duke that at first glance it seems misshapen, but had a certain natural charm. The Duke asks to look at the statue for a moment. He observes the artifact, analyzing its shapes, and finally manages to perceive a secret in it. In that statue, there was a hidden magical energy, which had probably escaped when it broke. He asked the Lord if the statue had already been found without the head. The butler explains that he remembers hearing complaints from the dealer, telling him it was already broken when he received it, and that lowered its price. An angel statue bathed in energy found in a magical bag. A young woman chosen by the great golden dragon. James reflects on those events, trying to convince himself that they are just coincidences. Esther's boots leave footprints in the soft snow. Our protagonist is once again at the top of the mountain, in a frozen setting, and mentally she asks herself what she is doing there again. She wonders if she had dreamed when she went back in time, while the cold wind blows through her hair. She stops, haunted by her feelings, not knowing if she was in a dream or truly living that moment. In a gesture of faith, Esther begins to pray for the golden dragon to allow her to see her son again, swearing not to waste her second chance at life. In her bed, the young woman cries while she sleeps. Inside her, the only desire is to see her dear son again. The morning sun illuminates an elegant room. Breathless, Esther suddenly wakes up. Relieved, she realizes that she is in her chambers, realizing that it had all been a dream. Getting up from bed, Esther wonders what time it is after all. The young woman walks to a large window bathed in sunlight. She hopes that the Duke managed to capture the thief at the Gasly mansion, because that will prove that she can change the future with the knowledge of the past. At first, Esther was concerned with making the dragon lotus bloom, because that way she could have her revenge and see Luca again. However, the situation had changed now that she had decided to cooperate with the Duke's plans. If she can use her knowledge through him, she imagines she could prevent many catastrophes of the future. She then decides to organize everything she already knows. Pulling a chair to sit down, she thinks she needs to remember everything that will happen in the next 6 years. With a quill, she begins to note the events. A flood in the south, and a pandemic. Illegal drugs that were spread in poor areas. What else could happen again? Satisfied after writing what she needed, she thinks that should be enough for now. She takes the papers where she had written, folds them quickly, and throws everything into the fireplace, for unfortunately there was no way to trust that her stepmother and Rachel would not meddle with her things. Suddenly, the young woman hears someone knocking on her bedroom door. It is Sasha, her maid, and she brings an elegant cart. The young woman had brought her a bowl of water for Esther to wash her face in the morning newspaper. While our protagonist washes her face, Sasha tells her that the chef had prepared omelets and asks if she would like one. Drying her face, Esther realizes something. In the newspaper, there was a headline in bold saying that they had caught a thief who had tried to infiltrate the Gasley mansion. The butler had noticed the movement and acted quickly. Excited, Esther grabs the newspaper to read the news better and declines the traditional omelet. Instead, she would like an omelet made with egg whites, and Sasha watches her, slightly confused. Finally, she asks for a cup of coffee and dismisses the maid. When left alone in the room, Esther recalls that there is nothing better than egg whites to get rid of dark circles. A good omelet would also help reduce some inflammations. Remembering her past life, she recalls how much she hated going to work meetings looking tired, and she used this formula daily before traveling back in time. Suddenly, our protagonist hears the sound of a carriage approaching. Looking through her window, she sees the Duke's carriage approaching with a chamberlain inside. That must mean that… However, her thoughts are suddenly interrupted by Sasha's hurried footsteps through the mansion's hallways. Desperate, the maid calls for Lady Esther, even before entering her chambers again, which greatly surprises her, since Sasha was usually very calm and reserved. The young woman, quite flustered, enters the room exclaiming that Duke Leonel had left a letter for her. Esther thanks her kindly while Sasha hands her the correspondence. The young woman also informs her that her breakfast was already being prepared. She asks permission and runs out of the room, leaving Esther alone with James's letter. Our protagonist recalls how the maid resigned after Esther had her marriage arranged, wondering what might have happened to the other maids. With a delicate instrument, Esther breaks the seal of the elegant envelope. James's letter informed her that he would send a carriage to fetch her at 3 in the afternoon so they could talk more. He also suggested that she wear something more casual, considering the fatigue from the previous night to avoid tight clothes. She reads the letter with a satisfied smile, supposing that he had already written it, anticipating that Lady Rachel and the Countess would try to intercept her. Esther laughs to herself, thinking that if the two had gotten their hands on that letter, their faces would be completely red. The young woman then ponders and begins to reflect on possible clothing choices. However, she realizes that she might not have anything decent to wear for that meeting. She looks at her dresses hanging and realizes that none of them were appropriate. Already with the egg white omelets on her face, she remembers that at that moment, her family was going through some financial difficulties. Esther grabs one of the clothes hanging on the rack. She looks at herself in the mirror, wondering if that dress would make her look like a teacher. She keeps thinking about James telling her to dress casually, but since he had already seen her in a terrible state the night before, then she would like to dress properly. Laughing at the situation, she thinks she is being painfully optimistic, isn't she? After deciding what she would wear to meet him in the afternoon, she says it is time to put her skills to use. Sasha notices young Lady Rachel passing by her in the mansion's hallways. The young woman has an angry expression on her face and runs past the maid without noticing her presence. She was very upset that Sasha had accepted the letter and taken it directly to Esther, since without it, she would not know where her sister would meet the Duke. As she walks hurriedly in her delicate shoes, she wonders why her father and the Duke were turning their attention to her older sister. Lady Rachel Fraser was our protagonist's half-sister, and she came from a less privileged family, having neither wealth nor titles. Since childhood, she had to make herself prettier than other young women, having to pretend to be a generous and perfect woman. However, such performance also came with much stress. For when she was alone, such tension turned into irritation and resentment. At first, she took out her anger on the maids and butlers. She blamed broken cups on some unlucky maid and, even worse, tricked the butlers so they would not complete their tasks, so they would be punished. However, one fateful day, Rachel found Esther alone. With a malicious smile, the young woman's evil intentions were carried out on her older sister, who, unfortunately, had no one to tell. Rachel finally realized she had a toy on whom she could play her tricks at home. Rachel is deeply irritated by her sister's change of personality, since Esther had managed to reverse yesterday's situation. Upon arriving, she begins to devise a new strategy. Since before just a few words were enough to destroy her older sister's self-confidence, so even if she left with the Duke, Esther would not be able to focus on him. Tormented, Rachel wants to find her at all costs. In the mansion's hallway, Esther calls out to Rachel. With a carefree expression, our protagonist asks her younger sister what she was doing there. At the top of the staircase, Rachel looks in astonishment at her sister downstairs. Rachel is somewhat unsettled to find Esther already ready to leave. Esther asks her what the problem is. Descending the stairs, Rachel tells her that she was different from usual. The young woman promptly replies that she used to wear a lot of heavy makeup, so that day she had decided to use something lighter. Did it look strange to her? Esther's attitude surprised Rachel. However, already with an evil plan in mind, Rachel begins to tell her that that look still seemed very inappropriate compared to her previous appearance, and asks her why the change of look on such an important day. Trying to deceive her sister, Rachel tells her that she should improve her makeup and that she would help her. Esther lets out a light laugh, realizing that her treacherous sister was throwing her bait to make her look like a fool in front of the Duke. Removing Rachel's hands from her arms, Esther tells her that there is no time to get ready again, and that it is more important not to keep the Duke waiting. Enraged, Rachel tells her that he will be disappointed to see her like that in an attempt to shake Esther. However, our protagonist is very shrewd and does not fall into that trap. Then, elegantly, she tells her younger sister that the Duke would never be disappointed with her for such a small detail. Trying to manipulate the situation, Rachel asks her how she would know something like that. But Esther, with her sharp intuition, returns the question. Rachel's fury increases upon hearing her sister asking her if she would not also know how to react, correct? Losing her composure, Rachel grabs Esther's arm firmly, ordering her to listen. Esther also begins to get annoyed, telling her that how she did her makeup was none of her sister's business. Rachel begins to shout, saying that she only wanted to help her, and that Esther should not mock her sister. However, our protagonist accuses her of trying to make her a fool, reminding her of the events of the previous day. With a serious expression, Esther asks her if she had already forgotten the commotion she caused at the party, being accused of having a romantic affair. Besides everything, what Rachel was trying to do was embarrass her in front of the party guests and ruin her sister's reputation. Rachel becomes extremely nervous, telling Esther that she was quite surprised, and mentally wonders how much Esther knew and how she had discovered her plans. And also that day, besides putting a drug in Esther's tea, Gellert was supposed to be by her side in bed, but he had disappeared. Picking up her hat, she apologizes and says she has to go, and that she was sure Rachel was only trying to be nice. Changing her posture drastically, Esther tells her sister how rare it was to see her caring about her while adjusting her elegant hat. She turns elegantly to leave and tells Lady Rachel that if there is another opportunity where she wants to help, just let her know. Such a delicate gesture leaves Rachel distraught. An elegant carriage moves through the city. Esther feels satisfied thinking how surprised her sister had been to see her leaving. In addition, she remembers how much she learned to take care of her skin and herself when she opened a cosmetics business, and all that effort had been worth it. She sees James waiting for her at the meeting place. Esther steps down from the carriage and greets him by calling him Your Highness, to which he responds with a smile. Radiant with joy, she walks toward him. He observes her curiously, thinking that she reminds him of some small animal, like a weasel. The Duke notices that she is very cheerful, and she tells him that the future she had seen in dreams came true. He compliments her, saying how attentive she is, and Esther comments to him that newspapers are a very useful source of information. As they walk, Esther comments to him that the Gasley family's art collection is truly famous, and even a failed robbery attempt would draw the newspaper's attention. Then, our protagonist asks him if it was true that the butler had captured the thief. James replies that of course it was a lie, for he had been the one responsible for catching the thief. The Duke tells her that they managed to capture the scoundrel and recover the works of art without anyone being hurt. The two stop in front of a fine candy shop. Esther is impressed with the store, as it appears to be a very elegant place. James tells her that the sweets he had given her were from that place. He invites her to see the inside of the shop, where various treats of many colors and types can be seen on display. Esther admires the shop's appearance, but notices that there are no other customers in the store, only the two of them. James reveals to her that he rented the entire confectionery just for them. Our protagonist is very surprised by James's gesture. However, while picking out a few things, he tells her that there was no surprise at all, for the two of them could not talk freely near other people. He hands the young woman a beautiful, rounded, pink checkered box. Still surprised, Esther asks James what that was. He replies that, according to the shop owner, that is the largest box they have, and that she could fill it with whatever she wished. Esther is perplexed by the man's attitude. Smiling mischievously, she confesses to him that when she was a child, she had a dream similar to that situation. Since she was little, she always dreamed of visiting a shop like that, while holding her parents' hands. Her greatest wish was to be able to buy all the sweets in that shop and share them with everyone. James points out the various kinds of sweets to her, from the sourest to the sweetest. While his butler, Albert, prefers the peach-flavored ones, he prefers the sour ones. Esther is immensely happy with James's thoughtful gesture and turns her attention to the shop's treats while he smiles in satisfaction. Meanwhile, in his thoughts, James recalls that through the reports he had received, apparently the Fraser family treated Esther as an intruder. He had learned that many times they treated her as if she did not exist. The situation was so grave that sometimes the family attended parties and other social events without her being included. Because of this, it is no wonder that he had not recognized the young woman at first when they met. James watches her as the young woman tries several sweets, thinking that he would like to give her something to cheer her up, and that apparently Albert's way of cheering him up was very effective. With a very affectionate look, James is happy to see her enjoying herself. Esther looks in admiration at her box full of sweets, while James helps himself to a cup of tea. The box, which was already quite large, looks very pretty when filled with sweets. Our protagonist looks at the box, somewhat worried that she may have gotten too carried away filling it. James also serves a cup of tea for the young woman. The two sit at the table to talk, and he tells her that now he 100% believes her words, that she had seen the golden dragon in dreams and that it had revealed the future to her. She asks if that certainty has to do with the thief from the previous night. He says yes, and begins to explain to her that the thief had stolen something very peculiar, which made Esther uneasy. The young woman recalls that the thief would steal some valuable works, but that she did not know anything bizarre about them. She wonders if something might have changed because she interfered with destiny, or if something bizarre was among the objects. Esther asks James what was so bizarre among the stolen pieces. He explains that all the works were made by famous artists, except for one of them. The Duke tells her that one of the pieces was a headless angel statue, made by an unknown artist, and inside the statue he had been able to sense a presence of magical energy. He adds, telling her that the bag used by the thief was a magical artifact, which had been carefully crafted. The thief himself had confessed that the mastermind was an anonymous figure who guaranteed that that bag would be able to neutralize the magical barriers of the Gasley mansion. James laments that the thief did not know who had hired him for the theft. Esther is shocked by the revelation, as the incident seems to be more than a mere coincidence. He asks her to think with more concentration, because the logic was that the golden dragon had revealed that future to her, for some reason. Although the memories of our dreams are fragments when such pieces are put together, this can trigger a greater wave than we imagine. Esther reminds herself that she traveled to the past to be able to see her son again. However, if what James is saying is true, her return may mean much more than she imagines. She mentally questions why the golden dragon sent her to that moment in the past. After all, she cannot simply confess to him that she was 6 years ahead in the future. In her thoughts, Esther resigns herself that at that moment she must do whatever is within her reach, and that there is something she must prevent from happening at all costs. She tells James that the golden dragon revealed to her that it was making a bet with the other dragons, a silly game. The young woman knows that dragons like to bet among themselves. It is something portrayed in stories of books and plays, and it should not make James suspicious of her. He asks her what that bet was about. Esther replies that such a bet encompasses the entire continent they live in. Basically, if the Duke's magical experiments prove successful, the second prince will inherit the throne, having the power to bring peace to the territory. However, if the Duke fails, the first prince will ascend the throne, and monsters will invade the lands, destroying everything. James becomes distressed in the face of such a prophecy. Esther tells him that the golden dragon showed her a vision of the empire in ruins. The young woman tells him that the mythological being desires a future of peace, and because of that, it bet on him and wishes success for his experiments. Distressed, James replies that everything seems simple, but now the fate of the entire empire is in his hands. For somehow the dragons had too much free time to make risky bets like that. Esther swallows hard, thinking that for him it will be very difficult to succeed so abruptly. Despite that, the young woman has an ace up her sleeve, which is the information she brings from the future. Without further delay, she tells him that to create the essence of the spell, he needs a white crystal as a support for the other magical pieces. She explains that a white crystal will keep the essence stable. In her previous life, Esther recalls that when the news of the experiment went public, Duke Leonal and the second prince were falsely accused of treason. However, just before the prince gave the orders for them to be taken, miraculously the experiment was completed, and the Duke escaped unscathed from the Empire. Because of the situation, the first prince had given an order to seal all the mines throughout the Empire, and to confiscate all the white crystals that were for sale. Even so, the Duke was able to obtain the white crystals. Esther recalls that at that same time, one of the bottles of her best-selling perfumes was made with that crystal. Based on the circumstances of that moment, she reasons that the white crystals played an important part in the experiments. Because of that giant mess, she could no longer produce more perfume bottles, even though she herself had designed them. She had worked so hard. She apologizes for not being able to provide James with more information on how to combine the ingredients. However, he becomes excited, telling her that what she gave him was more than enough for him to start, with the help of researchers. She tells him that in the future, the Whittaker family will sell their crystal mine, and gives him the idea of buying it using a false name and also acquiring the twin mountains near the mine. He asked her why buy the mountains, since in the past attempts had been made to extract coal, but in vain. Then Esther reveals to him that if he digs 20 meters deeper, he will find white crystals. The young woman tries to correct herself, saying that she had seen the crystals there. She advises him about coming up with a plausible excuse, so that the nobles could sell him the mountains without suspecting anything. Then he reasons that if he gets a mine, the experiments will be easier. She observes the man's meticulous expression. He did not seem very sure how to use the crystals. James was lost in his thoughts, absorbing the information Esther had told him. Our protagonist remembers that when creating a new item to sell in her shop, she always got lost in strategies, and in those moments, only wanted to go home as quickly as possible. She suggests to him that they end the day there. The Duke gently helps Esther up into the beautiful carriage, thanking her for the outing that day, apologizing that he has to end it so early. She also thanks him and tells him she has some matters to organize. Before boarding, the young woman turns to him, asking hesitantly if she could still ask him one last favor. He says that she does not need to be afraid of anything and that Esther can tell him what she wants. Surprising her, he reminds her how benevolent he is with those who are kind to him. She gives a loving smile and realizes that she is working with a wonderful man. As a carriage drives away, she narrates that heavy rain will fall in the south of the empire and grain prices will soar. He becomes curious and asks her if the golden dragon had told her that too. She confirms that yes, the rains will come in a few months and the southern landscape will become desolate, for the rivers will overflow and the wheat fields will be destroyed. Esther asks James to buy as much wheat and other grains as he can, as well as fruit seeds that can be used later. The young woman explains to him that in the future, farmers will even eat fruit seeds to survive, and this will result in a shortage for the following year's harvest. James tells her that it is surprising how far ahead she is with information. She smiles, saying that all that wisdom was thanks to the golden dragon. In her past, she remembers that the heavy rains caused less damage in the southeast, and the nobles of that region sold wheat at exorbitant prices. And because of that, unfortunately, many people in the empire perished, which later caused an epidemic in the empire. The farmers, in desperation, ended up eating the seeds of future harvests. And the family that cultivated fruits seized the opportunity to sell such seeds for an even higher price. With trembling hands, Esther remembers everything very well, especially the words that the Count of the Southeast would say at social events that Gellert made her attend. Driven by greed, Count Shin of the Southeast asked for more rains like those, so that his family could achieve the greatest wealth in the nation. Gellert, equally corrupted by greed, collaborated with him to get that dirty money. Esther becomes restless when accessing those memories, displaying an anguished expression while her whole body trembles with anxiety. The young woman's sincere request to the Duke is that he buy the provisions before the rains, and when the time comes, resell them to the farmers at a fair price. She fears that such business will not be very profitable for him. He ponders for a few moments, but replies that although it is not a great investment, it is an act to help people in the future, so he would not have to worry about profits. She is shocked by his words. In her thoughts, she realizes that it had been a long time since she had met such a generous person, someone capable of using common sense. He teases her, saying that it is a shame that she judged him as a soulless man who could not cry in the face of such a tragic story. Esther tries to justify herself. James tells her that there is no need for her to apologize and that he was not upset. He warns her that he will use his contacts to buy the items she requested in such a way that no suspicion will arise. Esther once again thanks the nobleman's kindness. The elegant carriage finally arrives at the Fraser family mansion. He apologizes to Esther, saying that he will not be able to speak with her for some time as he will focus on his research. When he enters his laboratory, he usually does not leave for a week. James asks her if she will be able to manage alone during that period, and she explains to him that she has been used to that life for some years. Esther thanks him for accepting her request, saying that she loved the trip to the candy shop and that the box of sweets had been the most thoughtful gift she had ever received. The man smiles, happy to be able to help Esther with her wishes. They say goodbye, and the young woman thanks him once again for the wonderful day. He watches her as she gets out of the carriage. As she happily returns home, he looks at her with a slightly confused gaze. James remembers that he had not told her that he would immediately resume the experiments, but she got out of the vehicle and did not even let him escort her. They depart back to the Duke's mansion. The carriage follows its course at sunset. The Duke remembers that he had never said goodbye so quickly to a girl before. In his memories, he recalls that all the women he had been involved with clung to him with immense desperation. Suddenly, he awakens from his thoughts. He tries to rationalize that the relationship between Esther and him was purely professional. After all, who would stay so close to the boss for so long? For the Duke, that is a perfectly reasonable interpretation. Suddenly, he feels his heart beating faster, wondering what that feeling could be. In a very elegant room, we hear a person say that he had always wanted to taste that drink. It is Ethan Elpin, a young mage with silver hair and golden eyes. He tells someone that you pretended you did not know what I was talking about. So why this sudden act of kindness? He serves a glass of wine. James lightly swirls the glass with the drink, asking the young man who would not want a good wine to discuss important matters. Ethan asks James what such an important matter was that they were going to discuss. James begins to tell him that there was a young lady, and Ethan interrupts his sip of wine. He watches James closely, pondering what intentions James might have. Then Ethan asks him if he would like him to make the young lady disappear without leaving a trace. James freezes upon hearing the suggestion of the young mage. Enraged by the possibility of doing such a thing, James asks Ethan what he was talking about. Ethan becomes confused by the man's reaction. Still stubborn with the idea of making someone disappear, Ethan asks him if he would then like to leave some traces, to which James replies that he should immediately spit out the wine he had drunk. James asks Ethan if he considers him an assassin. Ethan scratches his chin, trying to understand his friend's intentions. However, James remembers that he had been very harsh in the past. He recalls that he had already gotten rid of all the women from his past. But in his defense, the vast majority of them were spies or assassins. He demands the identity of a blonde woman with long hair who had tried to harm him moments earlier, and she tries to justify herself, saying that it was not what it seemed. But his thoughts turn to Esther, who had been sent by the Golden Dragon to show him the future. Just yesterday, they had agreed to work in secret. He then reveals to the mage that this woman had told him how to stabilize the spells, shocking Ethan greatly. He abruptly stands up, dropping his wine glass on the table, and begins to fire several questions at James, asking where that woman was. "Bring her immediately." James, startled by the sudden change in attitude, tells the mage to calm down. He explains to Ethan that the young woman is the daughter of a noble and that she is not married yet. Because of that, they could not simply bring her there, as it would raise numerous rumors. The young mage, frustrated, complains that it would be better if she were the daughter of a merchant or farmer. He sits down resigned and asks what would happen if someone tried to take her away from them. Ethan suddenly has an idea. The mage confirms with James if she really is of noble birth. Radiant with his new plan, Ethan suggests that James marry her. James is stunned by the sincerity in the young mage's plans. He then explains that noble families would never allow their daughters to marry randomly, so James could propose to her first. With a big smile on his face, Ethan tells his friend that he should marry the young woman at the first opportunity. He declares that the plan is that as soon as they marry, he could invite her to his mansion, win her heart, and make her his wife. And thus, everyone involved would be happy. Still dizzy from Ethan's crazy ideas, James asks him to compose himself and listen. He reveals to the young man that Lady Esther is already in an arranged marriage set up by her family with political purposes. Then Ethan tries to rationalize that. If it is a marriage for political purposes, the bride does not necessarily have to be her, right? After all, does she have sisters? James tells him that she has a younger sister and brother, Lady Rachel and Matthias Fraser, twins from Esther's stepmother. Ethan asks if the stepmother was good to her, but James knows very well how things are in that family. The young mage does not give up. saying that the stepmother would prefer to marry off her own daughter instead of Esther, and the young woman suffered greatly at home, didn't she? Upon hearing the young man's words, a thought passes through James. As always, Ethan takes hold of the situation very quickly. However, what he had suggested was quite reasonable, because Esther was far too talented to be just a spy, and as long as she could see the future, he would need to protect her. He thinks about the benefits she would have by gaining the title of Duchess. After thinking for a while, James asks Ethan what they would do if she did not accept, and the young man replies with the question of whether he really thought any young woman would refuse to marry him. Shamelessly, Ethan tells him that James has an unbearable personality, but at least he managed to control himself. But James imagined that because of the young woman's attitude, she had not fallen in love with him. He recalls Esther's beautiful green eyes. He reveals to Ethan that he kissed her at the party yesterday, which leaves the young man very surprised. Ethan then asks what situation could have led him to do that. James tells him that she had blushed a little, but beyond that, she only seemed perplexed. But the mage was even more astonished at the idea that there was a woman who had not fallen in love with James. The mage tries to cheer him up, saying that there are other men in his research team. He imagined that at least one of them would be to Esther's liking. However, those words unsettled James a little. James remains silent as he listens to Ethan list the names of several researchers, elves, alchemists, lords whom Lady Esther could fall in love with. Innocently, he includes himself on the list, reminding James that he is a baron and very skilled with magic, as well as young and handsome. James displays a furious look as Ethan asks him if she would like it if he proposed to her, and upon hearing that absurd suggestion, he orders the mage to be silent. Ethan asks what was wrong with James. His friend, lost in thought, even considers one of the young men a good match. However, James questions himself why he is feeling so jealous. He stands up and tells the mage that Lady Esther had been chosen by the Golden Dragon, so they needed to offer a great reward for her help. He would propose to her. He tells the young man that he is not only a mage but also a knight, as well as the richest man in the nation and a duke. Ethan asks him about the other time he had failed. James asks him what he was talking about. Ethan asks him why the sudden anger, but quickly adds that if she refuses him, he should let him know immediately so that he could find someone trustworthy to marry her. Letting out a deep sigh, James reassures him, saying that he does not need to worry about that. The man thinks that if he really proposes to her without a plan, she may refuse him. However, he thinks of offering the young woman a deal. James gives a beautiful smile as he makes plans. He knows she is a smart young lady and that she will accept his proposal. He thinks that if he offers a deal that will benefit her, someone as intelligent as her will surely accept. He is confident that in the past, a Lady Melbourne had offered him a marriage contract, which would be quite useful for him at that moment. In his memories, James goes back to a day when he is in his study with a young woman sitting in the armchair before him. The beautiful room is decorated with fine furniture and ornate rugs. The young woman, with red hair and brown eyes, offers him a marriage contract. She is Tasha Melbourne, heiress of the Baron of Melbourne. She says she knows he had not yet found a companion despite his age. That fact must bother him greatly. He listens to the young woman's words in shock. She continues her speech and tells him that he will need someone to take care of him, and then insists that they marry and he grant her the title of Duchess. Because if he does, she reveals that she will have fulfilled her role, but that she will not love him. Such statements only increase the Duke's disbelief in what he was hearing. He is completely confused by the situation and tries to understand what madness the young woman was speaking. While she wipes her face with a handkerchief, he wonders if she was trying to make him lower his guard so that an assassin would find him immediately. With firm words, James asks her if that would be a formal contract. After all, a contract is only effective if both parties benefit. She pretends to be clueless about what he was saying. He dismissed her, stating that although he was of age, he was in no hurry to marry and doubted her domestic abilities. For him, the agreement would bring no benefit at all. James reflects on the memories of the past, thinking that her offer had been terrible, and there was nothing fair in that contract. He finally thinks that he would very much like to marry someone he loves, and his thoughts turn to Esther. The Duke remembers that his parents had a loveless marriage, arranged for political purposes, and that there was no need for him to repeat that horror. He considers the idea of sending her a letter before confining himself in his laboratory. The man walks to the main desk of his office. Ethan draws his attention, telling him that it is terrible to propose to a lady by letter. Promptly, he says he would never propose to the young woman in that way, and that the letter would be to give her time to consider the contract. The young mage, insistent, asks him what he would do if she still refused him. To which James replies that he bets an 80-carat red ruby that she will not refuse him. Such a valuable stone in the deal startles Ethan out of his thoughts. He asks him if that ruby is the same rare stone used to cast the most diverse spells. Suddenly excited, Ethan calls for Alexander, his familiar. Alexander is a magical cat with wings, orange fur, and beautiful green eyes. The feline materializes on the table in front of the mage, who promptly asks him to deliver James's letter to Fraser's mansion as soon as he finishes writing it. The little magical cat meows in complaint at his master's commands. Ethan tries to argue with him that it is not very far from there, and that the request is worth at least 2 large salmon fillets. Alexander is a cat with a will of his own and begins to meow back at the sorcerer, complaining about the requested task, and Ethan tries to justify and negotiate with him. James, in a reassuring tone, says that Alexander need not worry. He himself will ask his chef to make large salmon fillets for him, along with a strawberry sherbet for dessert. The little cat perks up at James's promise, meowing with joy. Meanwhile, Ethan tells James not to bribe his familiar. At Fraser Mansion, sunlight floods Esther's room, where she sleeps peacefully. Our protagonist wakes up. She looks beautiful with her radiant hair, and realizes she had not slept that well in a long time. Suddenly, she hears a knock at the door and invites the maid to come in. A young woman tells her she will prepare water for her to bathe. Esther takes the opportunity to ask her for a cup of tea, and the young woman leaves the room. However, our protagonist is a very intelligent young woman and picks up on a strange air in the maid, who seem to be acting differently. Then, Esther finally understands. She gets out of bed, realizing that her outings with the Duke of Leonal must have generated some gossip among the servants of the mansion after her father had spoken to everyone. Furious, the Count calls for his wife, Esther's stepmother. He points to his daughter and asks Patricia if she is seeing his daughter's clothes. The Countess is astonished to hear her husband shouting while he says that his daughter's clothes are old and worn out. What would the Duke think of that? Esther feels very satisfied remembering that scene. She feels grateful that her father is a man very easy to please. Taking a brush to comb her long hair, she wonders where she should start investigating to understand the dragon lotus. She recalls having read several books, but she had not been able to find information about the flower in any of them. Esther then assumes that she must use different means and techniques to investigate more deeply about it. Her stepmother still had full control over the servants, which meant it would be difficult to find someone willing to cooperate with her or whom she could trust. If she were to share information with the wrong people, they could share it with the Countess, which would put Esther's life in danger. The young woman feels a chill thinking of the terrible consequences of trusting the wrong people. At that point, she imagines that Count Shins must also be making his maneuvers. Not only had he lost his son, but the arranged marriage had been canceled. She recalls having suffered so much to earn that second chance in life, and she is fully aware that she cannot be careless and waste it. She then decides to ask the Duke the next time they meet. He is an incredible mage and has other sorcerers and alchemists working for him. Possibly he would know something about the dragon lotus. The maid returns to Esther's chambers, now with water for the young lady to wash. From an elegant teapot, the young woman serves her a cup of tea. Esther then calls the maid's attention. She promptly asks what she could do for her. Esther then asks her to clean the things in the room and not to allow anyone to enter unless she calls. Esther looks suspiciously around. She supposes that the reason the maid was being so attentive was because of the rumors that she could be the next duchess. It was customary for the bride to take some maids with her when she married, but Esther was determined not to take any of her stepmother's pawns with her. The young woman often saw her things constantly disappearing, whether elixirs, quills, or even books. She knew she could not confide in them. The maids she suspected the most were Sasha and Annie. When she was forced to marry Gellert, Sasha moved with her, but that alone did not point to who was guilty. In her past life, she tried to ask one of the maids for help, but because the woman was loyal to the stepmother, she did nothing to help Esther. She knows how much she suffered before, and she is ready to use this chance to expose everyone who wronged her. Esther takes her beautiful teacup adorned with golden ribbons. She remembers when she used to drink a lot of tea to stay awake, but nowadays she could stay alert without needing the drink. As our protagonist enjoys her tea, the cat Alexander arrives flying to deliver James's letter to her. The magical feline tries to get her attention by arriving near her window, and Esther looks at the magical little creature in surprise. The orange feline shows her a letter tied around his neck, meowing happily. Esther and the magical cat look at each other for a few moments. She is amazed by the cat, thinking that she remembered that mages had magical beings and called them familiars. But she did not know they could be like that. The feline licks one of his paws, and Esther is still contemplating him, finding that situation at the very least peculiar. Above all, she also finds him very cute. The little cat signals his neck for the young lady to take the correspondence. Esther removes the thin collar from the magical cat, wondering what that letter would be about. Our protagonist reads the letter written by James, and in it he says that he was worried he might have caused her trouble at home. He trusts that she is capable of dealing with any issues that may arise. He warns her that they will not be able to make contact for a while, so he decided to send that letter to address a suggestion. Esther has no idea what he might be talking about. He, James Lehenol, would like to ask for her hand in a contractual marriage. Esther is completely shocked and with blushing cheeks after reading the Duke's proposal. The letter continues. Knowing that they had not known each other for so long, and despite it not having been love at first sight, he was certain that such a contractual marriage would be very beneficial for her, as he believed it would be an opportunity she would not want to miss. She wonders what benefits those would be. In the letter it says that, first, in the name of the Lehenol clan, he would be her sword and protector. If anyone dared insult her, he would defend her honor as a royal knight. Second, his family had resources and contacts, being able to help her in any ventures she wished to pursue. Lastly, he tells her that she would have the freedom to do whatever she desired, and that he guarantees her all the power to accomplish whatever she wants. James is certain that this proposal might interest her, and because he is unable to see her and speak to her in person, he feels frustrated not being able to see her expression. Esther is very flushed as she absorbs all that information. To conclude the letter, he would like to make her a confession. He had never loved anyone, and no one had ever held his heart. So, there were many things he still did not know. He did not have much confidence in their ability to love each other as husband and wife after marriage. However, if Esther accepted this proposal, he would dedicate all his efforts to loving her. Though he could not guarantee that future, he promised her his dedication so that one day they could truly love each other. Ethan calls James so that they could go to the laboratory. He tells her that soon he would enter a portal and spend some time confined. However, should she refuse, Esther would have nothing to lose, as he would do his best to give her all the support she needed. Even without love, he assures her that they would be strong allies and partners in this endeavor. He asks her to deliver her answer to Lord Alexander, the orange magical feline. He could hardly wait for her response. Signed, James. The Duke leaves a note that he will return in a week so she could think calmly about the proposal before replying. Esther wonders if she might be dreaming. She turns to the magical kitten who is watching her intently. The young woman, still not believing what she had read, asks if the kitten could bite her finger. He looks back at her, very confused. He lets out a long sigh. After all, a lord had to do what he had to do, right? Instead of biting the young lady, he delicately licks her hand, letting her know that it was not a dream. Esther absorbs the reality of the situation. She speaks to the kitten, telling him that James had just asked her to marry him. The orange feline gracefully jumps onto her lap. Esther and the kitten get along very well, and he purrs in her lap. She looks at him with affection, still under the effect of the words she had read in the letter. Lord Alexander meows sweetly at her. She wonders if he would truly strive to love her. To tell the truth, the first two conditions would already have been enough for Esther to accept his proposal. What she needed most at that moment was security and freedom. After all, she had already lived through a marriage in which she was imprisoned. For a long time, she had believed that hard work could secure her a family and a husband who loved her. Now, despite the sad memories, our protagonist is determined to leave the past behind, and it would be foolish of her not to accept the Duke's offer. She thinks that after all, even if they did not end up loving each other, she was satisfied with the agreement. Then, with a delicate quill, she begins to write a reply to him. Although it had been a long time since she had written letters, she felt the words flowing naturally at that moment. Esther recalls when she had her own business, and every holiday she would write several letters to all the families that had helped her. Normally, that work would be left to an assistant, however. Her ex-husband, Gellert, had hired a very lazy assistant who despised her, and when she asked him for help, he only wrote something rude and nonsensical. And to show sincerity, Esther decided to write them herself. Those efforts were very worthwhile, as many families felt touched by Esther's words, and so continued to support her in her work. She had started her business because of Gellert, and despite that, it had been a rewarding experience as she had met wonderful women. Our protagonist thinks that in the future, she would like to open a new venture. Meeting the Duke had brought her freedom and security, which made her very grateful. When she finishes writing, she asks the magical cat to take the letter back to James. The feline promptly agrees. She thanks him, and they bid farewell. Outside the young lady's chambers, it is a beautiful day, with plenty of sun and no clouds. Alexander flies back to the Duke of Leonal's mansion, and Esther waves softly. As the afternoon falls, the sunlight begins to fade. A door opens, and a maid starts to sneak into the room. She locks the door right after. The young woman begins snooping through the drawers of Esther's vanity. She grabs a comb decorated with pearls and roses. The maid seems very nervous and gives a nervous smile. She repeats to herself several times that none of this was her fault. Taking the comb with her, she says that all of it was Lady Esther's fault. She sweeps the floor of a very elegant corridor. The young woman lets out a long sigh of dissatisfaction. She is Annie, one of Esther's maids. She laments not working for Lady Rachel. All of her maids received satin ribbons and beautiful sleeves adorned with lace. Compared to Rachel, Esther made them work too much and did not give them generous rewards for their efforts. The maid's look is furious. Since she had to go into the young lady's chambers to clean them, it was only fair to take a few trinkets for herself, wasn't it? Some maids laugh quietly, whispering something, and Annie notices the movement. The two are talking about something that had happened some time ago. The fact that the Duke of Lehenal had escorted Lady Esther back home. Her carriage was fabulous. Annie listens to the conversation in shock, while the young women talk about the platinum ornaments on the carriage doors. The young woman suspects that Lady Esther may point the finger at her or Sasha when she notices small belongings missing, and she certainly would never take a maid she didn't trust to work for her and the Duke. Annie grits her teeth in frustration. Throwing the broom on the ground, she thinks all of it is so frustrating. She has the thought that, since Esther would not take her to the Duke's mansion anyway, the young woman makes sure that no one else is there with her. Then she sneaks back into Lady Esther's chambers. Driven by greed, she judges that her mistress would not miss a few little things that disappeared. And all of it was her fault for treating the maids so badly. She commits a theft, and her motives are to place the blame on Lady Esther. After some time, our protagonist stands before her vanity. And then she is certain that it is Annie who is behind the small thefts. A few hours later, there is a knock at Esther's door. Another maid enters the room at the young lady's request. Esther tells her that she would like to ask her a few questions. She sits down a little nervously, asking what it was about. But Esther reassures her, saying she does not need to be alarmed. Our protagonist offers sweets, which clearly cheer the young woman up. She politely accepts the sweets while Esther sits in front of her. The protagonist asks her if she knew anything about Annie and Sasha, as she was curious to know how they behaved when she was not around. How were they with the other servants? Were they liked? The young woman eats the sweets while listening attentively to her mistress's questions. However, she wonders why those doubts. Sasha is very good at her job, but terrible with conflicts. She did not get along well with the older maids, so they always put her to clean the worst places. Annie, on the other hand, was the opposite, very friendly and talked a lot with others. She gave little gifts to the other servants, and because of that, ended up having many friends and being quite popular. However, she also fought a lot with the other servants, as the young woman recalls, and there were rumors that Annie had light fingers. The young maid reveals to Esther that Annie had gotten into trouble with the other maids because of her light fingers. But what did that mean? Esther calmly explains that it meant Annie had the habit of taking things that did not belong to her. Then she asks, who was responsible for cleaning her room today? Our protagonist thanks the young woman for sharing all that with her and gives her a small gift in return, asking her not to tell anyone what they talked about that day. The young woman is very happy to see that it was more sweets and thanks her mistress. Esther noticed that the comb she had left as bait had disappeared, and since Annie had cleaned her room, the culprit was her. Our protagonist, using her cunning, understands that the girl would not be able to abandon her thieving habits. For now, Esther knew she needed to stay quiet, but she should think of some way to punish Annie. A beautiful library is bathed in sunlight. The shelves are crammed with books. While reading a book, Esther thinks that she should create as many good products as possible now, so that when she restarted her business, things could flow better. She hears a noise that catches her attention, distracting her from the book. Her father, Count Fraser, enters the library. He asks her directly what she is doing there among the books. She says she would like to read a little. Clearing his throat, her father takes the chance to ask her if the Duke of Lehenal had contacted her again. To conceal the truth, Esther tells him that she and the Duke had not spoken since their last outing together, since there was no logic in telling him that she had received a letter from a magical cat. For her plans to succeed, she needs to stay discreet and not share information. She needs to play the role of the annoyed daughter. The Count does not give up and tells her that she needs to contact him. Esther tries to escape the situation, claiming that the young man must be busy with his work and that she would not like to be invasive with him. She reassures him by saying that it is only a matter of time. Her father, enraged, says that she needs to wake up. Yelling, the man says that she herself should go to his mansion. He wonders why she is always so stubborn. Esther stays silent while he throws a fit. He orders her to write a letter to the Duke immediately. And then he storms out of the library completely furious, frightening the maids who were nearby. The two young women start gossiping about the Duke apparently cutting contact with Esther, and the other replies that Lady Esther had been foolish to let her only chance slip away. One of the maids, Lady Rachel's informant, had overheard the conversation and knows she needs to tell her everything immediately. Rachel is shocked by that information, questioning its truth. The young woman gives a satisfied smile, for according to her, it was logical that the Duke was only taking advantage of Esther. She asks the maid if her sister is still in the library. Rachel enters the library triumphantly and calls for her half-sister. Directly, she asks Esther about the Duke having cut off contact between them. But our protagonist does not take the bait, simply answering that the Duke is a busy man. Rachel tries to provoke her by saying that he must not have liked the way she dressed last time, as it was a deplorable outfit, and that must have irritated the Duke. She approaches Esther, saying that if her sister had listened to her, that would never have happened. The young woman tries to manipulate her sister, telling her that she should listen when she has something to say, because she only wants her well-being. "That is," she said, "if there is a next time." Esther listens to all of it very bored, thinking that she was ready for anything her sister would say, but her victorious posture was truly tiresome. Rachel looks at her with a malicious gaze and at the same time with a certain disdain. However, Esther accepts placing herself in a subordinate position before her family so that they will leave her alone and she can continue with her plans. Far away, someone pours magical liquids into a cauldron. A shimmering, pearly liquid drips from a spoon. Surprisingly, the cauldron begins to bubble, and the one responsible for that mixture is astonished to see that reaction. That mixture gives rise to a beautiful bluish crystal, charged with energy. Back at Fraser Mansion, several maids share meals while chatting in a large kitchen. One of them begins to talk about Lady Esther, saying that her father had made a big scene with her in the library, while another young woman laughs at what happened. Another maid says that she would never let a man like the Duke slip away, and another girl calls Lady Esther desperate. Anne joins the conversation, claiming that Esther would never be a duchess. He had only escorted her once, so it was nothing special. The young woman feels satisfied with herself, thinking she had done the right thing in stealing that comb a few days ago. However, one of the maids who had spoken with Esther sees how terrible Annie's attitudes are, insulting her own mistress. She stands up to leave, as she could no longer bear the heavy atmosphere of the conversation. Closing the door behind her, she walks away from those cruel young women. Alone, the girl reasons that if she tried to defend Lady Esther, the others would turn against her, making her life a living hell. And she could even lose her job. Because of her sick mother, she knew she could not leave her work. The girl was very frustrated with the delicate situation she was in. The magical kitten returns to our protagonist's room, flapping its tiny wings. He begins to meow while tapping on the window glass, catching Esther's attention. She rejoices at the sight of the magical creature and welcomes him. Esther is eager to read. James begins the letter by telling her that he has great news. His experiments had succeeded thanks to the information she had given him. Meanwhile, Lord Alexander carefully watches some little snacks on the table. The young woman feels very relieved to know that the experiences she had lived in another life proved useful. She knew the crystals were essential, but she had no way of being sure. She smiles, relieved that her guess had come true, while Alexander eats all the cookies. He had said he would contact her in a week, but he was a day late, and he apologizes for that unforeseen delay. Esther had not minded at all. After all, she was so happy. James says that if she allows, he would like to visit Fraser Mansion to ask her forgiveness personally. Esther notices that there is something more written at the end of the letter. He asks her why she does not call him by his name. Since now they are engaged, Esther is caught by surprise by his playful tone. She smiles sweetly, blushing as she thinks about how much she would like to call him by name. She also rejoices at the thought of him wanting to visit her, for she had never expected the Duke of Leonal to say such things. She composes herself, clearing her throat, trying to maintain control. Recalling his words in the letter, she thinks it is indeed time for James to come visit her. She gently asks Lord Alexander if he liked the little fish snack she had left there for him. The kitten looks very satisfied. The magical feline meows with joy. Although our protagonist does not understand the language of cats, she assumes he must have liked them a lot. She steps away for a moment, telling the kitten that she would write a response to the Duke and be right back. Sometime later, back at Leonal's quarters, James is called by Ethan. The young mage tells him that Lady Esther had sent a reply. James takes the correspondence from the mage's hands. Finding the gesture very rude, Ethan watches as James opens the letter and begins to read it. Esther says she was immensely happy to know that the experiments had worked thanks to the crystals and congratulates him. He smiles as he reads her words. She takes the opportunity to ask him to come to her house tomorrow around 3 in the afternoon, but not to tell anyone about his arrival. He finds it all very curious and continues reading. She says that her furious father will confine her in her room, preventing her from leaving. When he arrives, surely the Count will look for her, but by then she will have already disappeared. The Count will be in an awkward position while calling the servants to find her, and she would like the Duke to take part in this little play with her, acting as a furious noble who had lost his beloved fiancé. He becomes very curious about what Esther might be planning. She ends the letter by telling him she eagerly awaits his arrival. From Lady Esther. James is shocked by the strategy. Who was he to refuse a request from his fiancée? He asks Ethan to open his jewelry box, which surprises the mage. He is dismayed, claiming that James had already taken his emerald. What could he possibly want now? We go back in time to a week ago, when Lord Alexander was carrying the first letter to Esther. James tells his friend that he does not believe the young lady would refuse the proposal and that he should give up his rare ruby. Ethan, celebrating victory before its time, says that James had no way of knowing that, and if she accepted, he could keep his emerald. Now, in the present, the young man laments having lost his precious emerald, and James reminds him that he himself had made that bet, and that he should go open the jewelry box so he could choose something to present Lady Esther with. The young mage rushes off, almost bumping into Albert on the way. James welcomes Albert, saying that the timing could not be better. He asks the butler to bring him the dress he had ordered by tomorrow morning. Albert is surprised by the request and says he will do his best to have the garment ready, even if they need to offer more money. The butler wonders if he will finally meet the lady for whom the dress was intended. He remembers that James's parents, the former Duke and Duchess, never got along very well. Because of this, Albert will accept any young lady James chooses, as long as she is someone he likes. As he leaves, the man grows emotional at the thought that James will meet a good young lady from a noble house. Our protagonist is restless in her chambers. She thinks that on that day, the Duke will finally see how her family treats her. She believes he probably will not care much about it, but she would not want him to see her in such a pathetic state. Perhaps she feels this way because it had been a long time since anyone had been kind to her. She thinks she is starting to feel attracted to him. She realizes it is already time for lunch, and there is no time to remain lost in her thoughts. The family sits down to lunch in a luxurious room adorned in red and gold. Esther sits next to Rachel and begins to eat disinterestedly, which catches her sister's attention. Rachel aggressively asks why Esther is barely touching her food. Was this her new way of seeking attention? Rudely intruding on the sisters' conversation, Esther's father tells her that if she has something to say, she should say it immediately. She tries to get out of the situation, saying she was only worried and could not concentrate on the meal, and soon her stepmother also intervenes. The Duchess says coldly that if her behavior was because of the Duke of Leonal, her worries would not solve anything, and she should return to eating. With an assertive look, Esther says she was mistaken and that her worries were not directed toward the nobleman. She quickly changes her posture and says that he was not the type of person to worry her or make her jealous. Her stepmother then begins to ask her what it was really about. Annoyed by the girl's sudden happiness, she wonders how Esther could know such a thing since they had cut off contact a few days ago. Esther reveals that someone had stolen a comb from her some time ago, and that small objects always disappeared from her room, though she had not paid much attention since they were of little value. Rachel hears her sister tell that a comb with precious pearls had been taken, and since something of such value was stolen, she could not stop thinking about it. Rachel asks how her sister could have something with pearls. Arrogantly, she asks if her sister's worries were really not about the Duke, and if this was not an attempt to cause trouble for an innocent person. The table is set with several fine foods and delicate sweets. Rachel questions her sister if what she was saying was true. Esther says yes, and that the comb had been left on the mirror of her vanity, but disappeared a week ago. Her sister wants to know why she is only mentioning it now. Still trying to manipulate Esther, the young woman continues to bring up the Duke, and because of that, she would be trying to harm some maid. Her father asks if that was true. The man, not at all reasonable, sees the situation as if his daughter were trying to cause a scene on purpose and decides to take the opportunity to give her a lesson. He orders her to tell the truth. Esther begins to tear up. The young woman cries out to everyone that the comb was something her mother had left for her. Her father is shocked, and she goes on to say that the object was a keepsake from her late mother. She reveals that her mother had not left her many things to remember. So Esther was very careful with that comb and did not want to lose it. The girl tells her father that she had already asked the maids, but no one had been able to find it. She begs her father to help her find the thief. Her father becomes enraged when he hears his daughter mention his former wife in front of the Duchess. Determined, Esther pleads with him for help. The man shouts for silence. He yells that it was only a comb and that she should not make such a scene over something so useless. That could have been resolved in other ways. The man, overcome with rage, orders Esther to go immediately to her room with no permission to leave. Esther bites her lip, knowing that all of this was bound to happen. She knew that her father was a dishonest man who craved attention and said whatever was necessary so that the people around him would think he was a dignified man. But he was nothing more than a fraud. While Esther mourned the loss of her mother, he was already flirting with another woman. And that was not all. Her stepmother had become pregnant by him well before they were married. The twins had been born only 5 months after the wedding. Returning her father's fury, Esther stands and asks him if he would like her to remain locked up for a week. Correct? Rachel is confused, hearing her sister then ask that they bring her meals twice a day. Firm in her words, Esther asks her father what kind of rumors people would spread if his daughter were to die of starvation. Her father and her sister hurl insults at her while Esther walks away from them, leaving the dining room. The young woman re-enters her chambers. She quickly opens the doors of her wardrobe. Beneath the dresses, she presses a kind of hidden lock, and she watches as a secret compartment opens behind the elegant clothes. She smiles happily, thinking that it had been so long since she had seen that place. Our protagonist looks over drawings from her childhood and a very cute stuffed puppy. She holds the toy affectionately, telling him that she was back. Esther recalls that when she married Gellert in her past life, that wardrobe had been burned. She remembers that her stepmother had created a huge uproar when she asked to take her closet to her new home with her husband. The Esther of the past had tried to negotiate with her stepmother, telling her that the wardrobe had been a gift her mother had given her when she was born. Completely unhinged, her stepmother slapped her across the face, shouting that the young woman would never take anything from that wardrobe with her. Esther stood there sobbing as she touched her face after being struck by her stepmother. Then she heard her stepmother order the wardrobe to be burned. However, back in the present, fortunately, the wardrobe was still intact and her stuffed puppy, Toto, was still there to keep her company. She begins telling him that on her wedding day, when she lifted the veil, her groom almost fainted in fright. Gellert had looked very frightened because of his bride's face. Esther had needed to apply very heavy white makeup to hide the bruise her stepmother had given her. She laughs, thinking that because of that, the entire ceremony had been ruined. She stops for a moment and realizes that the Duke must be arriving at any moment. Our protagonist keeps in mind that if what she had read was correct, some knights who became masters of their craft were able to sharpen their senses and hear even the faintest noises at a distance. The determined Esther is absolutely certain that James will find her. Far from the young lady's chambers, a butler informs the Count that the Duke of Lehenal had arrived. Esther's father is unsettled upon hearing those words and asks if it was really true. The butler confirms that the one who had arrived was indeed the Duke because he had recognized the dragon emblem. The Count is very annoyed that he had not announced his arrival, but he orders that Esther be brought to the room. Shortly afterward, the butler returns and, apologizing to his master, informs him that they could not find Lady Esther anywhere. The Count is shocked by what he says. The butler explains that when they went to fetch her in her room, the door was unlocked and the young woman was nowhere to be found, even after searching every corner. Her father grows even angrier, imagining that his daughter had disobeyed him despite his clear orders to remain in her room. He orders that the Duke be brought to the reception hall first. In the immense room, the Duke sits impatiently with his arms and legs crossed, and while the Count and Countess observe him, Rachel brings tea to serve them. The Duke looks disinterestedly as the young woman serves him a cup of tea. Rachel seemed to have prepared herself especially for that occasion, with neatly combed hair and a beautiful lilac dress. Casting a furious glance at the family, he asks, "What was going on?" He says to the Count that he was there to see his eldest daughter, Lady Esther. Trying to smooth over the situation, the Count tells him that the young lady was still asleep. In truth, the malicious man had wanted to say that she had gone out, but the Duke had stopped his carriage right in front of the mansion, so that excuse would not work. The Duke looks annoyed at the older man, and the latter wonders where his daughter could be. In addition, the Duke notices much murmuring in the house, mentioning Lady Esther, and he asks the Count if his home was always so noisy. Had something happened? The noble knight asks the Count when he intended to bring Lady Esther into his presence. The older man tries to disguise his discomfort, but is interrupted. The Duke points out that the Count seemed to have very little interest in his daughter, and he continues to provoke him, accusing him of having lost his own daughter inside his house. The stepmother also listens as the Duke says that all of that was very embarrassing. He turns to her and asks if Esther was not really her daughter, correct? Without leaving his act, the Duke says that he is tired of waiting and informs everyone that he himself will go look for her. The young woman's father tries to stop him, asking him to wait a few more minutes. But the Duke ignores him, moving away quickly. Determined, the man moves away under the Count's protests. His gaze is furious, and he urgently wishes to find Lady Esther. The older man follows him through the corridors of the mansion, calling him incessantly, but the Duke ignores him completely. Suddenly, he hears a very soft sob from someone who did not seem like they would stop crying anytime soon. He realizes that there was only one person who would be in tears in that house with that family. Meanwhile, inside the wardrobe, our protagonist cried heavy tears of sadness. She was remembering her son, Luca. Specifically, that when she was pregnant with him, she was able to feel genuine joy. The young woman caressed her belly affectionately, thinking about when she would finally see him. Still, in her return to the past, she remembered having seen a young woman on the street with a child who looked exactly like her. Esther wonders if her son would also have her features. In her memories, she could hardly wait to meet her son, Luca. In her painful past, the young woman remembered how her cruel husband had defiled their child's room with a maid, leaving the child alone. Her trauma always takes her back to that fateful moment. She wonders what she could have done so that it would not have happened. Suddenly, she wakes from her thoughts, hearing her name being called by someone. Then James opens the wardrobe door and finds her there completely vulnerable. She looks at him with great surprise, despite what they had arranged between them. James then realizes that she had truly been crying. The young woman's big green eyes were very expressive and brought him many emotions. He stops and ponders for a few moments, asking himself why she needed to hide and cry alone. Our protagonist is still slightly in shock as he pulls her out of the wardrobe. Bringing her closer, he seeks to reassure her, apologizing for having taken so long to find her. She listens emotionally as he tells her that she no longer needs to feel afraid. Despite James's soothing words, she cannot prevent a tear from falling. Suddenly, James snaps his fingers, using his talents as a mage. With a flick of magic, the doors of Esther's room close. She sits in a chair and watches in shock at James's mastery in performing such a feat. She lets out a big, "wow," right afterward. James shows a beautiful smile, telling her that just a short while ago she was crying so much, and now it would be hard for him to hold back while she made such a cute little face. She starts to blush deeply after hearing that. He gives a sincere laugh while our protagonist tries to compose herself, telling him not to tease her. At last, he lets out a sigh and smiles at her. He finally decides to ask her why she had been crying for some time. She stays silent for a moment, thinking about how gentle his voice was, and how much she wanted to be able to reveal everything when he spoke to her that way, but she knows she cannot. Esther, at that moment, decides to lie, telling him that she had a nightmare while she was in the wardrobe. James realizes that she was hiding something from him, for apparently the young woman could not tell him. So he decides not to pressure her and will be patient, waiting for the right moment when she feels comfortable to tell him. Changing the subject, he asks her why she had been confined to her room. Esther reveals to him that she knew of a maid stealing her things while she was away, and to test her hypothesis, the young woman had left a valuable comb as bait, a keepsake from her mother, and just as she expected, it had been stolen. James listens attentively with a very serious expression. Esther tells him that she had told her father, asking him to dismiss the maid, but he had become furious with her for mentioning her mother's name. Because of that, he had put her in that punishment. The young woman wonders if Annie would still have the comb, because if the maid had sold it, she would never see it again. Esther feels that she should just give up. He asks her if she had been losing things for years, and she replies that yes, it had started with thefts of small worthless objects, and it had been 2 years since it began. James says, slightly irritated, that it was unacceptable for a count, leader of a family, not to be able to manage his own house and servants. Esther also judges the situation ridiculous and that he was not wrong, for she herself was tired of her father's nonsense. He says that insolent man should not upset his fiancée. James sweetly strokes Esther's head. He delicately takes her hand and tells her that she seemed very surprised seeing his magic. The young woman simply replies that she had never seen anyone cast a spell without using incantations before. Happy to see her mood improving, he tells her that there were more surprises on the way, and that the magic he was about to show her was even more fascinating. Outside the room, the Count greets the Duke, and at his side are his wife, the Countess, and some servants. Esther's stepmother makes a great scowl with a malicious look. However, the Duke is not intimidated and looks at the woman from head to toe. His gaze turns icy, and then he thanks Count Fraser, which surprises everyone. And then he continues, saying that he had shown him what kind of life Esther was having in that house. The Count is stunned and tries to find some justification. James, assuming the serious posture of a duke, says that there was no more room for doubt, for an artifact of the former Countess had been stolen by a servant. But instead of taking action, the Count chose to punish his daughter. The nobleman continues his speech, saying that he understands the closeness he must have with his wife. However, by sparing a criminal from proper punishment, it gave the impression that he was having an affair with that servant. The Count asks him what he was talking about, but James remains calm, giving a disdainful smile and telling him there was no need to panic. James continues and says that unless such allegations were true, and the Count is once again overtaken by his anger, mentally calling the Duke an insolent bastard. Esther is amazed to see the way he had managed to manipulate the situation, making a horrible man like her father change the entire staff. That is, if he wanted to avoid a scandal. And that would certainly involve removing her stepmother's pawns. Besides all that, James says that all the maids together were not able to find a single girl in her own room. They were truly useless. James makes a great provocation, asking if then the head maid would be the Count's mistress. Such a statement leaves everyone in shock. The head maid is devastated and tries to justify herself, saying that Lady Esther was not in her room. She had checked. She bows to him, declaring that they had searched everywhere there. But he curtly cuts her off, asking her not to annoy him with flimsy excuses. Esther watches him sowing discord, asking where, after all, the young lady would be, if not in her chambers. He had seen her at the moment he entered the room. The man says that the young woman certainly had no magical powers and no other miraculous power, so possibly they were accusing him of hiding her? The head maid apologizes, saying she should have kept quiet, saying it was not her intention to upset him or accuse him of anything. Suddenly, the lady's lips close completely, and for some unknown reason, she can no longer speak. James, moving his fingers delicately, used magic to continue controlling the situation. He was tired of hearing all that chatter. He tells everyone that he would even ask them to search the house to find the comb, but since he could not trust those servants, he would look for it himself. Turning to her, he asks her not to worry, for he would find her mother's artifact. Esther smiles at him, thinking that she was ready to face everything after staging that act, but she had not foreseen losing the comb. In her heart, she thanks him. Suddenly, as if by a stroke of magic, Annie is kneeling on the floor in front of Esther, James, and all the other servants of the mansion. She wonders how all of that could be happening. Esther greets her and tells her she is very disappointed about what happened. Annie, in an impulse, starts to say something. Bowing before Esther, Annie begs her 1,000 pardons and that she had been taken by greed, unable to control herself. She asks her lady to grant her a new chance. After all, she had served her wholeheartedly for the last 3 years. Our protagonist then asks her, why was she apologizing? Then Annie reveals that she had stolen something very valuable that belonged to Esther. She had lost control when she saw something so expensive on the dressing table, and because of that, Esther steps forward. She obstinately asks her why Annie only stole things from her and from no one else in the mansion, because everyone knew that she also cleaned the room of Matthias, Rachel's twin brother. Annie panics as Esther asks her why she had never stolen anything from him. She asks if the maid despised her for not having any power in that house. Despite the maid thinking that way, stealing anything from Esther is crossing the line. Annie, in despair, tries to apologize more times. She tries to manipulate Esther, saying that Lady Rachel's maids are always receiving expensive gifts, and that she had never given her anything. Esther asks if that was really the answer. After all, from what she knew, Rachel never gave gifts to anyone without ulterior motives. If the maids were receiving gifts, then there was a plausible reason for it. Agitated by fear, one of the girls with old burn marks begins to touch her skin. Esther takes a document, warning Annie that because she had done bad things, she would leave without that month's pay. In return, Annie could keep all the things she had stolen except the comb. Selling those objects would give her enough money to cover her dismissal. In a final act of kindness, Esther gives the girl a letter of recommendation so that she can find another job. However, that act of kindness came loaded with truth. For in that letter, besides recounting the maid's years of service to the Fraser family, it also revealed that she stole valuable items from her employers. Esther continues to read the letter aloud, saying that Annie would be a great addition to any household that wanted to get rid of its belongings for free. Annie exclaims that Esther could not do such a thing to her. The girl lunges at Esther, wanting to grab the letter from her hands. But she is stopped by James, who protects Esther from the girl's fury. He shouts to one of the butlers to stop that girl from doing anything else. Two men firmly grab the enraged young woman, preventing her from attacking Esther. Our protagonist warns her not to even try to get rid of that letter. Her father had stamped it with the Fraser family seal, making it a legitimate document. Tearing or burning any document signed by a noble was against the law. On top of that, the Duke had placed a spell on that document that would alert the entire city if anyone damaged that letter. Annie was clever, and should know what that meant. Annie is terrified, finally feeling the weight of the consequences of her actions. For the last time, she tries to beg Lady Esther for forgiveness, who simply asks that they throw her out. The butlers drag the screaming girl outside. Esther and James are together in the great family hall, and around them, several maids are whispering, fearful of the situation that had just happened. Our protagonist tells all of them that she hopes that incident serves as a lesson. With a cold expression, Esther declares that she was sure that some of them thought she was abusing her power and that the Duke had favored her. But in truth, no one knew what the future held. They should not despise a person simply because of her situation. And they should not flatter a noblewoman thinking that she would defend them. Esther tells everyone that she does not believe that everyone there were opportunists. She reveals to the servants that the reason she punished Annie was because she never treated her with a shred of respect, and such words leave them quite shaken. Our protagonist, with a very mature posture, orders the servants that from now on, they should treat all people with dignity and respect. James, at her side, smiles as he sees his fiancée so strengthened. After the young woman's speech, he says they should return to the reception room. She holds his hand and agrees. The couple climbs the stairs, moving away from the servants. After they are alone, one of the butlers lets out a long sigh of relief, and a cook asks him what that had been. The chef says it was as if Lady Esther had completely changed. The butler agrees with him, still tense from the events. He says that she was behaving like the wife of a great nobleman or something like that. We see several elegant gift boxes piled up in a corner. Esther looks at them in admiration, as if the young woman had never been gifted in such a way. James tells her that although he had not been able to bring more, he was happy to bring some gifts for her. He thought that on such a difficult day, some surprises could cheer her up. Esther's father and stepmother watch the happy couple with contempt, while James says that he wished he had prepared something more grand to make up for the things she had lost in the last 2 years. The Count clears his throat and begins to say that His Grace really did seem to care about his dear Esther. With a cold look, James says that at least he cared for her more than her own father ever showed. The Count is astonished at the Duke's boldness. He wonders why such treatment so suddenly. James says that he owns a hotel that had not yet been opened to the public and reveals to the young woman's father that he would like her to be his first guest and enjoy a night there. With a loving smile, he asks her if she would like that. The young woman says that she would very much, and her father tries to get her attention. James returns the cold look to try to silence the Count. Suddenly, the older man begins to lose his breath, not understanding what was happening. James begins to speak, saying that his daughter had had a terrible day and that he was only trying to help her forget the bad moments. Now, changing his tone to a command and with a serious look, he orders the Count to let his daughter have some fun. Understood? The Count begins to breathe again, and the atmosphere in the room is extremely heavy. And finally, he says that Esther may go. Esther and her fiancé leave the Fraser mansion and walk toward the Duke's carriage. The nobleman asks one of his servants, named Theo, to send a message to Albert, telling him to transfer the property title of the pearl shop to someone else. The young man asks him to whom he would like the title transferred, and James simply replies, "To Lady Esther Fraser." She is surprised by the greatness of that gesture. James tells her that he owns a shop that sells all kinds of pearls and delicate accessories, and since he would be transferring the establishment to her, she could stop by there when she had time. She is shocked, saying that she could not accept something so valuable. He reveals to the young woman that that shop had been a wedding gift to his mother. She had personally convinced a craftsman to work there, but unfortunately they did not have a very good relationship. James tells her that the man is very talented but very difficult to persuade to take orders, which leaves our protagonist even more surprised. Changing her expression, she tells him that he then seems like a very difficult craftsman to deal with. Since even James, with all his persuasion, had not been able to convince him, she wonders what such a man would be like. She remembers that she had been looking for a talented craftsman with pearls so that she could finally reopen her shop. She feels that if James is truly wanting to keep him at the shop, despite the difficult relationship between them, then he must indeed be a very talented artist. And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. What are your thoughts? Esther's future seems full of surprises, but do you think this will bring happiness or more problems? Tell me more in the comments. This work is called A Golden Fate That Transcends Time, and our recap went up to chapter 18. And if you want more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss any new ones I post. Kisses and see you next time.